Hello and welcome to this video where we're going to be talking about creating a program if you have Ehlers-Danlos, hypermobility, neurodivergence, mast cell activation syndrome, and all of those clustered symptoms that tend to come together. So this video is actually from a free webinar that I ran for my Bendy and Strong course. Bendy and Strong is a 16-week program that I run teaching people how to train with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility. So it's an educational course teaching the fundamentals of strength training and how we can adapt those to the EDS/hypermobile body. So this video is an additional workshop that I ran because people were asking a lot of questions about how do I actually put this information into practice and build a program for my EDS or hypermobile body. And this workshop, I decided to post it up here as well because there's almost no information out there. If you're someone with hypermobility, Ehlers-Danlos, MCAS, and co, there's almost no information out there on how to build a program. And additionally, if you're a strength coach who's working with an athlete or a client who has these things, there's not much information out there on how to adapt a program for our bodies. So some common program problems that can arise with these bodies, we're going to cover that during the webinar, but as part of the introduction, I thought I'd just give you an overview just so you understand a little bit about what this webinar is going to be discussing. So some of the common problem that we have with programming for these types of bodies is inconsistent symptoms that make following a plan very challenging. Even if someone's a high-level athlete like myself, I've trained at a very high level, but right now my body, the symptoms I'm experiencing are too inconsistent for me to follow a consistent plan. How do we work around that? How do we use our training plan to get us back on track when it's almost impossible to find even where that track may start or end? So that's one of the problems. And then this is made even more of a problem by the approach that a lot of coaches take of a very, very rigid program. So something we talk about in this webinar is how to be flexible with the programming approach so you can still get results. Another thing that some of the people in my course have expressed is they are completely new to programming and they don't know where to start. So we discuss that in this webinar as well. Another thing is they can sometimes follow the program. They sometimes can't. There seems to be different stages with Ehlers-Danlos, MCAS, hypermobility, where at certain points we have a little bit more momentum with our training. We can do a lot more, but then we may have a period of stress, something that happens, an injury, a flare-up that sends us completely off kilter, and it can be very hard to regain that momentum. So we talk about both stages of training and how to approach each of those different stages. We also talk about the fact that the rigidity of certain programs makes it very hard for us to follow. But then if we're going off program a lot with our neurodivergent brains, a lot of us also a common comorbidity of Ehlers-Danlos hypermobility is neurodivergence, ADHD and autism in particular. And how do we approach that with a neurodivergent brain? If we have the type of brain that loves routine, or if we have the type of brain that needs an external routine for us to follow, but then we have to constantly modify that external routine, how does that work for the neurodivergent brain? That's something that we discuss as well. And one of the big ones that comes up when we talk about problems with following a program for people with Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility is that when they've worked with a coach, the coach has been unable to or unwilling to adapt the program for the EDS body. So if you're a coach who's working with some of these clients, especially if you're a coach who doesn't have these things, so you don't have that lived experience, I hope that this webinar can give you a bit of insight into how to approach that. So this is part one of a webinar. I mentioned that actually in the actual presentation itself, but this is part one. We're just talking about the short-term planning. So how to create your training day, how to create your training week. In the second part, we will actually discuss more of a long-term plan. I'm not sure if that one will be up on YouTube or not. That one is something I'm running privately for my Bendy and Strong cohort. It may turn up here. If people want it, I can consider posting it up. But that's what we're discussing in today. It's a short-term plan is what we're discussing in this video. This is, like I said, it's a bonus video from my Bendy and Strong course. My Bendy and Strong course is a 16-week course teaching people the fundamentals of strength training and then how to adapt that to Ehlers-Danlos and hypermobility. So we talk about programming components. We talk about how to warm up with Ehlers-Danlos. We go through a lot of anatomy and understanding which muscles work with different exercises, how we can get certain underperforming muscles to perform a little bit better. We talk about proprioception and its role, how to incorporate proprioceptive challenges into exercises, how to progress with Ehlers-Danlos, and more. So these are just some of the things that we discuss in Bendy and Strong. If you would like to be part of that, you can go to my website, www.bendyandstrong.com. We may be running a live cohort. We may not be, depending on when you're watching this video, but you'll see the option to either sign up to the live cohort or to put your name on the waitlist for the next one. And of course, financial strain is a real thing with Ehlers-Danlos. So I have different pricing options ranging down to free. So if you really can't afford it, there are free spots available in this course. The whole design of the course is built around making exercise accessible. And I understand that financial accessibility is a big factor as well. So I hope you enjoy the video. Pop your comments below, pop your questions below, and thank you for watching. One quick thing before we go ahead. I do mention this at some point in the video, but just to give it as a disclaimer right now, this is all working under the assumption that you've been cleared for exercise, that you're okay to exercise. I know Ehlers-Danlos can affect multiple different body systems. If you have any particular injuries, you will need to be careful working around those and work off your physiotherapist's recommendations for those. The ideas discussed here are not a prescription. It's just a bit of guidance. It's a discussion and some ideas shared with you from me. So this is nothing here is a prescription, and you need to obviously make sure that you're doing the right thing for your body and working with professionals if needed. Thank you and enjoy the discussion. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Build Your Own Program webinar. This is part one. We're going to be doing part two in roughly a month's time. I'll let you know when it happens. So this webinar has come about because all of you who are currently attending the live and watching the recording are part of the Bendy and Strong program. Now, I'm probably going to put this video up on YouTube as well. So if you're watching from YouTube, you may not be part of that. But if you have taken the Bendy and Strong course, then we talk a lot about exercises. We talk a lot about programming principles, but we don't necessarily cover the actual building of a program. And that was something that people asked about. They said, I've got all this information, but how do I actually turn this into creating a program? Like, what do I do with that? So I'm hoping that today we can cover some of that. There's a couple of different things that I want to cover in this webinar. So I'm hoping that I hit everyone at every different level. We've got some more advanced people who have done programs before and understand the concept of how to build a program, but the Ehlers-Danlos bodying in the way and they can't currently follow one. And how do we make that work for EDS? I would actually put myself in that category as well. Then we've got some people who've never built a program before and don't even know where to get started. So I'm really hoping that we can cover both of those bases in this video. And if there's coaches, I know there's also coaches here attending. I want the coaches to also get an idea of why we may need to adjust for the Ehlers-Danlos body and in what ways we can adjust for the Ehlers-Danlos body. So the live chat, this is just for the live chat. What we're going to do is we'll cover questions at the end. So if you have questions and you can't stay until the end for whatever reason, you can just pop them in the chat and say, hey, I've got to run, but can you answer this? And then I'll get to it and we'll cover it you can come back and watch the recording. Just because if we answer too many questions as we go, the whole thing does it being a bit stop-start. So we'll cover the questions and for people watching the recording, if there's anything that we don't quite cover, you can always get in contact and say, hey, this wasn't covered in that. Can you do some more education on this? And like I said, there's going to be a second part to this as well. Now, this is sort of, why am I doing this as well? Well, obviously I want to help everyone who's taken the course to get more knowledge, but this is also a taster for the alumni network that I'm currently building out. It's going to be courses like this. They're directed by what you need and what you feel like is lacking in your knowledge. Building out of us who've taken the Bendy and Strong course, and the pricing for the network is going to be very similar. It's going to have graded pricing with a full price and discounted options and free spots available for people who need it as well. So it's basically hopefully going to cater to everyone. And it's going to have courses like this and other things as well. So that's actually something that we were sort of discussing before we hit the record button, talking about doing a one-on-one chat. I've actually got some slots for people to book in for one-on-one chats to discuss with me what we might want to include in the alumni network. And that's still an option. So maybe at the end, once I've stopped the record button, we can discuss that for the people who are live here. So build your own program, part 1. Let's go through some of the questions that I'm hoping to answer here for you. How do I build a program? That's some of the one of the biggest questions that we get from, especially from more beginner Ehlers-Danlos people. A lot of you, it's a weird thing that usually when people 5 or 10 years ago, if someone was into strength training who didn't fit this stereotype of being a big muscular person, they were usually quite passionate about strength training and wanted to be a bodybuilder, wanted to be a powerlifter or something like that. These days, it's become so popular that everyday people, disabled people, all kinds of people from every walk of life are getting into it. And they may have, or you may have, no prior knowledge about strength training, about competitive sports, about any of this stuff that it used to be a very niche knowledge set that you needed to have to even get into this world. So it's this interesting shift. It's a very exciting shift. But this means that there are some people who are exposed to very high level information because the internet gives us this exposure to high level information, but don't know what to do with it. How do I actually build a program? What do I do with this information that you're sharing in Bendy and Strong? So that's one of the things that we'll cover. Hopefully I will cover it in enough detail. If I don't at the end, please let me know. And I know that you're all like this, but just don't assume that other people, everyone else understands and I don't, therefore I'm not going to voice my opinion. No, if you don't understand, there's chances are that quite a few other people don't understand. So please voice it at the end if that's the case. What should I include in a program? How do I know that I'm covering all my bases? How do I know that I'm doing everything that I need to be including? That's something that we'll cover. How do I work around my EDS fluctuations? This is a big one. And in fact, this is going to be taking probably those are the two things that we're going to really hone in on today. How do I even build a program? But also with a program, how do I cater for Ehlers-Danlos fluctuations? Because what we're seeing is, how do I build a program? If I ran a course teaching you how to build a program that was not geared towards Ehlers-Danlos people, it probably would not help you with this one. The standard way of programming does not actually help us to work around the Ehlers-Danlos fluctuations. So it's something that we actually have to really work in from the beginning. Leading to the question, why don't traditional programs work for me? Why have I failed at other programs that I've worked with a coach, or the program that I downloaded from the internet, or the program that I've been running for myself recently? Why do I feel, if I haven't even started training, why do I feel really unsafe training with other people's ways of training? And then, of course, how do I get results? Because the whole point of following a program, why do we talk about program? It's because we want to get some kind of result at the end of it, which we talked about in the goal setting webinar that we did about just over a month ago. So that's the kind of thing that we will tie it back to at the end. And does this different approach that I'm going to teach you today, does it still get results? The answer is, of course, yes. So in today's discussion, we're going to cover a short term. Like, this is like planning out your training day and planning out your training week. When we're thinking about programs, there's sort of two, we did cover this in the Bendy and Strong course, although some of you, if you're in the most recent stream, we won't have covered it yet, but we talked about how you can create a short-term plan, a mid-term plan, and a long-term plan. So this is sort of our short-term plan that we're going to cover today. It's your training day and your training week. And then we sort of imagine it's like building blocks or like Lego blocks or something like that. You build these Lego blocks together. You blocks if you're training 3 days in a week. So that becomes its own little block. Once those 3 get locked in together, that becomes its own little block. And then you have multiple weeks that you build together, and that becomes a training block. And then those training blocks, you build multiple of them together, and that builds out your training or bigger cycle or whatever it is. So we're just going to hone in on the smaller training blocks today. Your training day and your training week. What's that going to look like? In the next session, we're going to cover more about progression, periodization, which is basically just long-term planning of your training, moving through the different stages. So once you've been training for a couple of weeks, develop these skills, how do you then apply that to the next stage with the Ehlers-Danlos stuff in mind, and where do long-term goals fit in? That's going to be in our future session. But today we're going to be talking about, what does a training day look like? What does a training week look like? Which exercises we should pick? How do we pick sets and reps? and what does that week actually look like in terms of which days do we train and how often do we train throughout the week, etc. So some of you will be familiar with this terminology already, but a program is basically a plan. So if you're thinking this program is some fancy thing that means something, it doesn't really. It's just a plan. A program is a plan of what we're doing with our training. And like I said, we've got a short-term plan, mid-term plan, long-term plan. If you're into sports coaching world, you may have heard it as a microcycle, a mesocycle, and a macrocycle. Micro is the week, meso is the month, and macro is the year. So let me just, okay. So let's start by talking about what are some of the struggles that we've had following a program. So I acknowledge for some of you that you've never followed a program, you don't know what a program is, you're new to this program world, but we're going to skip ahead to some of the people who have followed a program, some of the traditional style strength programs, and because I could have just run this as a traditional style strength program workshop, and then you all would have been like, okay, cool. I know in theory how to create a plan now, but I don't know how to apply that to my Ehlers-Danlos. And those of you who have already tried to follow a program would be like, this feels like I'm butting my head against the wall because I'm doing all of this stuff already and it's not working. So what's going on? So let's skip ahead and think about why this traditional approach to programming often fails for people, where basically a plan is created that's not created for someone with Ehlers-Danlos. A plan is created that's very rigid, that's very, you must do these things, you must progress, you must add weight to the bar every week. You have a predictable health pattern, you have a predictable mental health pattern, you have a predictable body that we can just assume is ready to go ahead and do the work without any kind of fluctuations. So this was taken from, there was, for some of you, you got this access to this form, some of you didn't. There was a form that I sent out to in certain groups for this, for people to fill out a questionnaire, particularly about programming. What were your problems? What are your problems with programming, etc.? And these are some of the responses that I got from that, and a couple of the ones that I've just filled in from talking to people with EDS. Fun fact, you're not alone. I really hope that when you read through this list, you'll start to think, oh, actually, that's the exact thing that I've been struggling. Other people are also struggling with it. Okay, point number one, it goes great for a while. Injuries or flare-up or symptoms or fatigue happen and we lose momentum. Losing momentum is a big problem that comes about with Ehlers-Danlos training. And this is something that even I experience. People always ask me, in the world that I'm in, it's small talk to say, how's your training going? And I'm just like, I don't think you actually want to know the answer to that question. You will feel very sad. And they always look really, oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And I'm like, well, I don't know what to say. That's just how it is. It's up and down. It's all over the place. You ask me this week and next week might be a different answer. So we can lose momentum with our training, which obviously then momentum is a satisfying thing, and feeling like we're getting somewhere and gaining ground is a very satisfying thing. And then when we add neurodivergence into that, that can escalate things a little bit more and make it even harder that we're stopping and starting all the time. Programs that aren't built for us. This was another complaint. I said, what made a program fail for you in the past? There was quite a few responses to that question on the form where people said, a coach wrote a program and it was too rigid. A coach wrote a program and it just wasn't catered to me. It was catered to other people. Wrong exercises that don't work for your body or just in general for the Ehlers-Danlos body. We cover that a little bit in the course. Some exercises just aren't the best for hypermobile bodies. Some of them are great for some hypermobile bodies, but not good for your hypermobile body. So some of them may set off your POTS, may set off dizziness, may set off other things. So that's something that we may need to take into account. Progression was too aggressive is another one that falls under this, or was too linear, was too expected. We assumed that you would be able to be like a robot and add weight each week. The calculations on paper sounded good, but the body in front of me couldn't handle that kind of progression. I've personally fallen victim to a program like that before, when I was at the height of my competitiveness in powerlifting. So it can happen to any level. And can't adapt for our needs was a big one as well. The coach didn't adapt for what I needed. The coach didn't know how to adapt my program for me. The coach didn't know how it set off my pots. It set off this other thing. And the coach didn't know what to do about that. Overdoing it was another theme that came up. And it's interesting because everyone who answered that on the form also followed it up with some kind of like, I feel like I need to push that hard. So let's get this covered now. We don't actually need to go to exhaustion in any of our sessions. This is not about exhausting your body. This is about coaching and teaching and training your body to move a certain way. Even if your goal is fat loss, even if your goal is muscle gain, even if your goal is competitive strength, take it from someone who's done all of those things at a pretty high level. It's not the sessions where you overdo it that get you closer to that. It's those sessions where you overdo it are the sessions that get you closer to injury. You do not have to go all out, guts on the floor, in order to get results in training. And in fact, that's usually counterproductive. And I've fallen into that trap as well. I remember when I was training during lockdown, I was talking to my coach and I said, these sessions are good. I feel like they're sculpting my body really well, because I was doing bodybuilding at that point. But I was like, I feel like I'm crawling out of the sessions. I feel like I can kind of skip out of them. And he said, good, that's what you're supposed to do. Why did you think you needed to crawl out of these sessions? And this is one of the sort of most highly respected bodybuilding coaches in Australia who was saying that to me. So it doesn't matter what your goal is. The goal is not to crawl out of the sessions. We want to walk out of the sessions or even skip out of the sessions. And if you still feel like you need to go to exhaustion, that may be something that we need to explore a little bit more. Is that a bit of overcompensation for not being able to do things? What is it? Like, where does that come from? It usually comes from something within us that feels a bit inadequate or something like that. If even just simply hearing, we don't have to overdo it. If you still want to overdo it, that's something that I think maybe is a important piece of information to listen to about your body. Why do you feel the need to overdo it? And that's something to explore. But we won't go into detail with that. That's not my specialty. But that's something that can get in the way, in particular with people with Ehlers-Danlos. Don't enjoy training. A lot of people said, oh, I just didn't like the training that we were doing. It was too cardio focused. It was too this focused. It was too that focused. I didn't like what we were doing. Now, this is a bit of a radical idea, but I think you should listen to that. I'm not the type of person in the fitness industry to just go and say, suck it up, go and do it. Sometimes you have to do things you don't like. If I did, I would be a hypocrite, because I very rarely do things that I don't like, just in life in general. So I'm a believer that you need to listen to these things. Your body is constantly sending you information. And it's very interesting seeing the patterns of the exercises that people don't like. As a coach who understands Ehlers-Danlos, the number of people who come to me and say, I just don't really like lunges. And I'm like, well, guess what? Lunges are one of the most triggering exercises. Do you also have SIJ dysfunction? Yes. Okay, there's a reason that you don't like lunges. So sometimes we need to listen to these feelings in our body. I say it often during Bendy and Strong. Our body whispers to us, then it speaks to us, then it yells at us. Sometimes I don't like this training very much is a whisper. Just like how I don't like this food very much is what our body tells us before we actually develop an intolerance. Not saying that every food we don't like is an intolerance food. I know for me, every food that I'm intolerant to, I don't like. So that is something that I think we should actually listen to and find something you do enjoy. And then that may end up leading you to, I really enjoy this, but I don't have the capability to do it now. So therefore, I'm going to go to the gym to build up the capability. And maybe normally I don't enjoy the gym, but now that I'm actually got some kind of direction and purpose with it, I do enjoy it. That's fine. It doesn't matter if you're doing something you don't enjoy for a little bit to get to where you want to go, but we need to have that purpose with our training. And that's a very neurodivergent friendly way to train. Neurodivergent people love to train with a purpose. I can ride all day if I'm riding to work, but if I just go for a ride for exercise, I don't feel like it. This is a way to hack our brain, is to find something that you enjoy. Now, fluctuating symptoms is another one that makes it really tricky. And this kind of ties into the next point. Sometimes exercise hurts, sometimes it's okay, which makes tracking consistency and tracking progress really hard. So let me share about something that's been happening to me recently with my hip playing up. I'm actually at the point where I can do proper exercises now, which is very exciting. So I'm doing, like a couple of weeks ago, I did a deadlift and I got up to like 120 kilos. It felt great. I felt amazing afterwards. And I thought, sweet, next week I can come back and do 120 kilos again, but I'll just add in a couple of extra reps because I'm not ready to progress in load. What happened? I can try deadlifts again the following week and I was I was crippled by them. I couldn't walk the next day. That's a bit weird. So next time I came to the gym, I thought, you know what? Maybe I'll try a squat. I could do the squat beautifully. Everything felt great. The next day I woke up, I felt better than ever. Sweet. So squats are it. So next week I came to the gym and I tried to do squats. My body did not like it. It was like I developed this weird intolerance to the exercise after doing it just once. What on earth is going on? And this makes tracking progress and consistency and all of that kind of stuff really hard. So for the set, you know how I talked about at the start, there's two camps that we're going to cover here. I don't know how to build a program at all, and I don't know how to work around fluctuating symptoms. We're going to cover that. We're going to talk about how to build a program when that's going on. And it's actually quite exciting, I think, the stuff that we're going to cover, because who said that we need to follow programs the way that we've been told that we need to follow them? And maybe there's nothing wrong with us. Maybe the system that we're trying to fit into is a bit too rigid, and we're actually we're just not built to fit into certain things. And I think it's a very exciting thing when you start to realize that, not just when it comes to exercise, but just as a whole. Maybe our neurodivergent Ehlers-Danlos bodies are not built to fit into certain systems, and that's why we feel more broken than we need to, because it's not us that's broken, it's actually the system. And we're actually the canary in the gold mine that's saying, hey, this system doesn't work for everyone. And I'm the person who that's very clear to demonstrate on. And it actually allows us to tear down dysfunctional systems as a whole. That's a whole other rant that I could go on, but let's get back onto the programming stuff. Getting bored is another issue. I don't know if I can specifically cover that one, because there's all kinds of different reasons why someone might get bored, but hopefully what we cover today will give you a model that doesn't make you bored. And then neurodivergent brains struggling with adjusting the programs as we go. This may come up in different ways. So I know for me, I've definitely got ADHD diagnosed, probably have autism. I'm not diagnosed with that, but probably have it. Something that I really struggle with is, if I can't follow the program, then what's the point? And if I don't have something there, if I've got a plan that I can follow, I can do it perfectly, because I just go into brainless mode and I just go in and do it, and everything's great and I get these incredible results. You know, if I have someone coaching me to do something, people are always shocked and surprised by how exceptional I become at that thing. I'm sure some of you can relate. Then the thing that gets in the way is my body fluctuating. And then all of a sudden I can't do it. And then I'm deemed this person who doesn't get results. And I'm like, this seems like the difference is whether I'm actually able to complete the task or not. So for me, it's a bit like, okay, well, if I can't follow the program, then what's the point? It's very all or nothing, I guess, mindset. Another thing I've heard people say, some people who say this shows up, they think, is more of an autistic trait, is that they will go in there and they know that the program's not good for them, but they just have to complete it as written. And then it ends up hurting them, even though they sort of know, part of their brain kind of knows that that's not right, what they're doing. They still like, I need to follow this program at all costs. So those are some things that we're going to cover in today's session as well. So a key point to take, and this is a guiding principle, fluctuations are part of it. You will have fluctuations. It's not a sign that you're broken. This is a sign that you have Ehlers-Danlos, and it's a very normal thing. And we're all in the same boat. We are all in the same boat with this. We all have fluctuations that make training very, very hard, and consistency very hard. So let's not treat ourselves as broken. Let's treat the system as broken and rewrite it a little bit. We need to program in flexibility. That's something that we cover in the Bendy and Strong course quite at length. And if you haven't covered that yet, if you're in the current stream, we haven't actually gone over all of this stuff very much yet. So that's what we've got to look forward to. But you don't need to have that information to know what we're going to talk about in today's session. Just know that we need to program in flexibility. What I've noticed is the more momentum, this is something I've been saying for a while, the more momentum we build, the less fluctuations we see. When I was getting at a really high level, I could just train with a quote unquote normal program with a few adjustments. Now I can't even come close to using a normal program. So it feels like, this is something I've said for a while, the more momentum we build, the less fluctuations we'll see. So some of you may be okay with following a regular program. Some of you may be in the boat where it's like every week something comes up and I can't do what I'm supposed to do. Neither is right, neither is wrong. They're different stages of Ehlers-Danlos, and Ehlers-Danlos is the great humbler. You may be in the other camp, and then all of a sudden something can happen and you fall into this other camp. I was prepping for the Amateur Olympia, which is the biggest bodybuilding competition in the world over in Las Vegas. I was prepping for that. And then I stopped my prep, moved interstate to come and see my dad who was sick, and then he died. And now here I am, unable to train properly. Going from being a high-level athlete to being unable to train properly. It can happen to anyone at any time. So this is why we talk about that. There's nothing wrong with either stage. We just need to know what we're dealing with in each of these stages. And if you have a client, this is something that you can consider as well, because what I don't want you to do is take away from this webinar, oh, I need to be super, super all over the place with all of my clients. First, you need to assess with your Ehlers-Danlos client, what stage are they at? Are they at the stage where they can follow something very consistently, or are they at the stage where they can't? And then we just adjust our approach accordingly. Now, it's very interesting, this language that I am using around this more momentum we build. And I had a great conversation with my good friend Jade, who's in this she's here, basically, is what I'm trying to say.
I'm here.
There she is. There's Jade. And something that Jade said was, we need to start paying a little bit more attention to some of the language that we use. So we sometimes use this very descriptive language, and without realizing how true and real that is. And then we fill in scientific knowledge about what's going on in our body, and we realize, oh my gosh, the descriptive language that we use was actually almost poetic way of describing what was going on in our body. So why do we get these fluctuations is a very interesting thing, and something that we've been talking about. And this is getting into the realm of me just it's sort of hypothesizing, it's sort of not, because it's actually based on a lot of very good findings from people and very smart people talking about this, but it's not really to the point where it's in a textbook. But these ideas that I'm about to talk about, I'm actually starting to wonder the image isn't showing up. What is the role of mast cells? Let me show you. That's the image there. Is supposed to be showing up, but I don't know why it didn't show up there. So what is the role of mast cells in all of this? Because why do we get these fluctuations? So you've seen that image now, screenshot it. It's an awesome book that I've been reading, Never Bet Against Occam. It's pretty heavy on the medical language, but even if you don't have super, super medical knowledge, it's a fascinating book. So I'm going to go back to presenting now. Maybe the image will show up. Hey, there it is. So what is mast cells? And I'm not going to go too into depth on this, because it's not actually quite as relevant to what we're talking about, because it is relevant, but what we're talking about is what we actually do next. But just to fill in some potential theories about what might be happening, this book, Never Bet Against Occam, it was recommended to me by Jade, and I started reading it, and I'm almost through with it. It's this fascinating book about a hematologist doctor who basically goes and investigates one of his patients who just has these weird symptoms that keep showing up in weird ways, and nothing explains it. He runs all the tests, he figures it all out. He basically lands probably mast cell activation syndrome. And then once he sees it in one patient, he can't help but see it in so many different patients. And in the book, he actually talks about the crossover between MCAS and HEDS. So there is that crossover. We've probably all heard about MCAS, but I don't think we can quite appreciate all of the systems that it affects until we start learning a little bit more about it. I know I didn't. So there are so many different symptoms that affects every single body system. Mast cells are in every tissue in our body, and they can get activated and release a bunch of different. One of them is histamine. So histamine is our allergic, let's call it our allergic response thing that's released in our body. So if you get a rash, we often attribute that to histamine. If you get seasonal allergies, we take an antihistamine. But there are a lot of other things that the mast cells release and have a lot of different effects on the body. Because heart rate variations, unwanted sweating, flushing of the skin, pain, different infections that aren't actually infections but present as infections, like UTIs and things like that. Insomnia, it can cause all kinds of things. And the constant thread that came up in this book, he used the words waxing and waning of symptoms, randomly showing up of different symptoms. And one of the big things that he talked about with the pain, with MCAS and pain, he said one of the most common manifestations that we see is that it changes from place to place in the body, seemingly quite randomly. The hand will hurt, and then all of a sudden the hip will hurt, then all of a sudden the neck will hurt. And there may be no logical reason why. Now, what I will say is a blind spot that I saw in this book, and this potential blind spot that I saw is a doctor. He doesn't have the same training that I have in learning about joints and muscles and how they interact and what exercises we can do to fix it. And also, some of the people in the book, maybe he was noticing these symptoms in them and it was linked to MCAS but not attributed to it. Maybe it was the Ehlers-Danlos that was causing it, or maybe it was the MCAS that was causing it. That's a common blind spot that I see when people talk about the role of mast cells in pain. Is yes, it may have an effect, but also is there a mechanical basis for the pain as well? Does the mast cell activation set off a mechanical change, and then that mechanical change causes the pain, rather than it just being a direct thing, mast cells equals pain? So does it come through this mechanical pathway, and therefore from a physiotherapy perspective, can we intervene the mechanical pathway and give you exercises to fix that pain? Or is it purely just give you a mast cell stabilizer medication and then that will eliminate the pain? I think that there's room for both and discussions of both, but what I don't see a lot of doctors discuss is this pathway that goes through the mechanical basis of pain. But what I will say is this might be an explanation for our fluctuating pain symptoms and for this weird whack-a-mole feeling that we get when I fixed this one, oh, this other thing has shown up, and then I fixed that, and oh my gosh, this other thing has shown up, and in fact, my fix for this caused this to show up. One of my clients who I've done one-on-one sessions with, who has Ehlers-Danlos, he is a bodybuilder, and found that he got cyclic vomiting after leg day in particular, just in general, but after leg day, which is something that can come about with Ehlers-Danlos. It's also something that was mentioned in this book as added to MCAS. And that makes sense. If we're doing a big leg day, that's a lot of stress on the body. It makes sense that that would then lead to more vomiting after that particular thing. If that then the stress of a big training session, because training session, unfortunately, yes, it's a positive thing, but it can also be a stress on the body. It creates this, it can create an arousal of these things in our body that may lead to, say, if that person is particularly susceptible to mast cell flare-ups, maybe that big leg day was enough to just tip them over into that mast cell flare-up, which caused the cyclic vomiting. That was why they didn't get vomiting on their upper body days, because it wasn't quite enough to meet that threshold. So there's a lot of things that I think that this actually plays a huge role. I highly recommend this book. And I do think that it plays a big role in some of the things that we're experiencing. How much of a role, I'm not sure. But what around it, I think that firstly, understanding that this may play a role and investigating if you have these issues. Mast cell activation syndrome is something that we can actually do things to manage. So that may be part of it, but also understanding what things trigger MCAS. Certain environmental triggers, certain environmental triggers. We've got other lifestyle factors, stress and things like that can trigger MCAS. Interesting. Something that people talk about is that MCAS can also cause psychological symptoms to arise. So it may not be just a one-way street with that. It may go two ways. Jade said the weather, things like this can all trigger MCAS. Periods. If you get worsening symptoms around your menstrual cycle during ovulation, if you get a period, that can be a mast cell thing. During pregnancy, why do a lot of people find that their Ehlers-Danlos symptoms suddenly come on during pregnancy, menopause, period, puberty, and then they were completely normal or fine before that, or a traumatic event? Things all bring this on. A lot of it we can hypothesize maybe mast cells, and mast cells may actually have more of a role than we ever realized. Now, I still do believe that there's that mechanical basis for a lot of our pain, and I'm not saying that going on a mast cell stabilizer is going to fix everything for you. I do believe that there's that mechanical pathway, but maybe the mast cells are playing a role in initiating that. I don't know. That's a hypothesis. I'm not saying it definitely is that way. I do believe that we need to address pain as a mechanical basis, because if we don't, then I think that we're just leaving a lot on the table that we can actually fix. But if you're at the point where it's like the mechanical basis is not making sense anymore for my pain, this may be something worth looking into. Jade's just said in the chat, MCAS interactions with HEDS sounds like a neuroaxial biomechanics paper. Yes, this is a great paper for everyone to read. Jade, are you able to grab the link and pop it in the chat? And then I'll also pop it in the notes for today's session as well. So Jade's a researcher who does research on Ehlers-Danlos, so is a very smart person to have in with us. And Jade and another clinician, a physiotherapist, wrote this neuroaxial biomechanics paper, and also a paper on fascia, which does mention mast cells and the role that mast cells may play with fascia as well. So we'll get the links for both of those in here. And Jade's just said the fascia paper is a little bit less heavy, which I agree with. Okay, so that's a theory. That's just an idea that we can start to maybe have in the back of our minds. But the question is about this. Question, that's what we're going to cover. Now, traditional programs, if you don't know what a traditional program looks like, we'll cover that in a second. But basically it can be anything. And I've got traditional in inverted commas here because I do think that the internet age with social media has really transformed what we think of as a traditional program. And I think that if you go back in the day, or if you teachers who don't spend much time on social media, I think you'll find that their programs have a lot more flexibility in them anyway. When I say flexibility, I don't mean stretching. I mean adaptability. Just to be clear, I never mean stretching when I'm talking about flexibility when it comes to programs. But a lot of really good coaches have a lot more adaptability in them. Why do we have these rigid programs that talk that you must do these exercises, you have to do the same exercises each week, you have to add this much weight each week, because that's what the paper says that you should be able to, not any research paper, just the piece of paper that they've calculated things on, says that you must be able to add 2% of load each week, and you must progress in each of these things, and blah, 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 blah. A lot of it actually comes from people who want to create a coaching system that they can sell to the masses. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm actually not anti-cookie cutter program. I think cookie cutter programs are actually a great way for people to be able to afford to do things that they wouldn't otherwise, get access to coaching systems that they wouldn't otherwise. And for a lot of people, just following a plan, they can do it. It's really not that crazy. I talk about this a lot in the Bendy and Strong course. The horseshoe theory when it comes to politics, whether you believe in that or not, is another thing. The horseshoe theory with Ehlers-Danlos and high-level athletes, I think, really applies here. Basically, it's this horseshoe, and the idea is with the politics thing, people say that the political left and the political right are on a linear spectrum and they couldn't be further from each other. But some people say that actually they're closer to a horseshoe and they have more in common than people who are more moderate. Now, again, whether you agree with that is a whole other thing. But that applied to Ehlers-Danlos and high-level athletes, we think of ourselves as on the polar opposite of high-level athletes, when actually I would say that we have more in common with high-level athletes in terms of what we need. And these cookie cutter programs where you just must do this, and you have to be, you have to train deadlifts once a week and squats once a week and bench press once a week and this once a week, and very just, if you fall outside of that, then you must be doing something wrong. That's how a lot of Gen Pop people can train. Gen Pop means just general population, just sort of, let's call them normies, can train. But for us, we actually need to adopt some of the approaches that more high-level athletes train. And if you talk to any of these coaches who have these cookie cutter programs that work for the Gen Pop people, they may have some high-level athletes that they also train who they do customized programs for. And then us people with Ehlers-Danlos, we also need a more customized program. And a great example I can think of is I've spent quite a number of years working with Sebastian Oreb, Australian strength coach, who's the coach of Hafthor Bjornsson, who's won World's Strongest Man. I've actually lost count how many times he's won World's Strongest Man. He's in Game of Thrones and all that kind of stuff. He deadlifts, I think it's like once every fortnight. He does his heavy deadlifts once every fortnight because he needs that long to recover from his training sessions. Now, if you go to a regular coach and say, hey, can I deadlift once every fortnight instead of once every week? They'll, oh my goodness, no, that's not right. That's not how you do it. You have to deadlift once every week. You have to do each of these lifts once every week, and you have to add weight to them each week. No. Adaptability for the individual is what's super important. Let me give you another example. When I was competing in powerlifting, I did not squat. I couldn't squat. I was in too much pain, but unfortunately, powerlifting is squat, bench, and deadlift. So coming into my sessions, I would do a single or a couple of singles of squats. 3 weeks out, 2 weeks out, 1 week out, and that was my squat training. Now, I know how the body works. That's the thing. We can hijack this silly regimented way of training, and we can circumnavigate it if you know how the body works. I know that the body works, that if I practice neurologically the movement pattern in those 3 sessions before my competition, but also I use mental imagery to practice how the movement goes, there's actually a lot of science behind mental imagery and the effect that it has on our nervous system, practicing those movements. I also know that I've been training squats for the last 13 years of my life. I also know that I'm building muscle through deadlift, leg press, leg extension, hamstring curl. And the cross-sectional area of a muscle, if we get our muscle and we chop it in half, so the fibers are running along here and we chop it in half this way, that's the cross-sectional area of a muscle. That bears an almost linear relationship to the amount of strength potential that muscle has. If I build my muscles through these other means, then mentally practice and physically do a little bit of practice of my squat technique, but I've also got years of squatting behind me, I can do pretty well at this. And I got a PB in every single competition that I did with my squats. Now, I will say my squat was not quite where it could have been compared to my other lifts, but woulda, shoulda. Like, I've got the body that I've got. And the same body that was able to do these crazy lifts is also the same body that has Ehlers-Danlos, and my knees used to dislocate when I was a kid, and sometimes it still feels like they're gonna. So it's one of those things. It's like, well, what is ideal? Ideal is what is the best for my body. And this, what's written in red here, is not necessarily the best for the body. Rigid idea of progressive overload. We have to add weight. That's the only way we can progress. Don't adjust the program. You're not allowed to adjust the program. I'm the coach. I know better. Ignore your body signals. You don't like lunges? Too bad. Lunges is such a hard exercise for everyone. Oh my God, everyone hates Bulgarian split squats. Maybe some of us hate them because they're literally making us unable to walk the next day, not because of I've got some muscle soreness, but because I've actually seriously injured myself. So some of these things you really need to push back on, and obviously pushing back against this when the person doesn't want to listen. It's like, how do I find a good coach? How do I find a good doctor? It's like saying, how do I find a good partner? If you're arguing about your basic rights to your partner, I'm sorry, they're probably not the right person for you. If you're arguing about your basic rights to a coach or to a physio or to a doctor, I'm sorry, they're probably not the right person for you. You need to find someone else. So a coach who believes that we shouldn't be allowed to adjust the program, don't be flexible with the days. That's like one of the most basic 101 things that we can do with Ehlers-Danlos. If it's on Monday, I don't feel good for squats, I do my upper body day on Monday, and then on Wednesday, I can do my squats instead. Who freaking cares? It's still finishing everything within this week. Coach knows best, so ignore your body signals. And social media driven. Driven. It's supposed to say driven, but drivel is actually kind of appropriate as well, because it just becomes this echo chamber of people repeating. And if you challenge some of these people love to sound smart. The number of times I see a post that doesn't actually make sense, and I've got a degree in this, and I'm not trying to be a know-it-all, but I think if anyone's going to be able to understand this concept, I should be able to, and I still don't. Yet I see all of these people who are very new to the industry commenting below, oh my gosh, yes, preach, I love this, wow, you're so amazing, yes, I completely agree. And I'm like, you don't even understand this stuff. How can you agree with it if I don't understand it, because it doesn't make sense? Anyway, that's a whole thing. But social media driven knowledge, quote unquote knowledge. So that's something that we need to, this is what programs don't work for us. So let's build out a program that does work for you. And I really hope that this is easy enough to follow. If it's not, again, just leave your questions in the chat or save them until the end. We will cover them. Even if your question is, I don't get it at all, that's okay. We can go over it. I want to make sure everyone understands this. So when it comes to building out your program, what we want to do is we want to, firstly, we need to basically pick how it's going to look through your training week. So what does your training week actually look like? Do you train 1 day a week? Do you train 2 days a week? Do you train 3 days a week? Do you train 4 days a week? Do you train every day? What does that look like? And that's something that I think would be one of the first things that we want to do. That's the first step. So pick your split. Now we're going to come back to what these are in a second. And actually, I've got a whole YouTube video on it, which perhaps I can link down here. Let me just find it as I'm going through. The first step that we want to think of is what's our training split. Now, some things to consider, and I've got some actual questions that you can actually ask, but this is just a sort of talking piece. Some things to consider: how many days per week you can train, how much you want to do each day, how much recovery do you need between your training days. So you may find that it's not necessarily a body part that needs to recover, but your whole body. I remember after I've had a virus, every time I need to train every second or third day. I can't train every day because my body just gets too tired. It's specific symptoms. I just get too tired. So that's something that we can factor in. Let me just grab the link here. I got the link here for the video. So save that if you're in the live, and I'll pop it in the notes for today if you're watching the replay. So you might find that you need non-specific recovery between your training days. You may find that recovery for each body part, you might get more than other people do. Now, this is something that's actually somewhat common with Ehlers-Danlos, that people complain that they get really sore after a workout, even if they don't do much, and even if they've been training for a while. Muscle soreness is pretty normal, and usually it happens with novel stimulus, so something different or something more intense than what we usually do. Different exercise, more intense exercise. Now, if you're weeks and weeks into your program and you haven't really done anything crazy on you and you're still getting crazy DOMs, that may be that you fall into this category that I'm talking about here. Some people with Ehlers-Danlos seem to get worse muscle soreness after exercise than others. Now, I'm building out a theory on what that is, and interestingly, it's something that it links into something that that the book Never Bet Against Occam talks about. So it may also be a mast cell thing, but it kind of it intuitively it feels like it may be a mast cell thing because it's this inflammation response to exercise. It's this allergic to exercise thing, and it's very interesting. Coming back to what I talked about before, how we use this language and it's almost poetic when we fill in the scientific knowledge. People with Ehlers-Danlos often saying, "I swear I'm allergic to exercise." Well, you may actually be. You may actually have a mast cell response to exercise that triggers these symptoms in your body. And you may be very, very accurate in what you're saying, poetically accurate in what you're saying. And again, this is why I say people with Ehlers-Danlos are not actually bad at knowing what's going on in their body. Actually are very good at it, but we've been shut down so many times that we learn to ignore those things that our body is telling us. Or it just sounds so weird that we don't say it, and then we learn not to say it. So another thing here is how much do you want to do each day? That kind of feeds into that. If you are someone who cannot handle a big session, I mentioned before a client who gets cyclic vomiting. They may be in this chat or maybe watching the replay, but they get cyclic vomiting after a big leg day. That might be, okay, let's not do a full-on leg day. Let's do a full body split where we break up a little bit of legs on each day, because that sets you too much over the edge. That makes you hit this big threshold where you get this inflammation response to exercise. So it may be the total amount that you're doing that's creating that. So it's a weird thing, because usually people would say, oh, for people with Ehlers-Danlos, you seem very fragile. I'm going to just make you train 2 or 3 days per week. Actually, you may be better off with the 5 or 6 day per week program, where we only in and do 20 or 30 minutes work per session, if that's what works for us. It may not be that that's what's best for us. And that's what I talk about in that YouTube video that I linked here. And there's pros and cons to each of these, which we're going to go through here. So that's where I talk about the pros and cons of these different potential splits. Now, these different splits are not the exhaustive list. They're just sort of some of the more common ones. You may have heard of them, you may not have, but it's basically for the people who are a bit more experienced with programming. You've probably heard of them. For those who are new, these are some things that you can pick from to pick how to lay out your training week. This is our first step, is figuring things out within your week. And it's not a rigid figuring it out. It's just getting a rough idea so that we have enough to get started with. So let's go through these questions that I've got here. How many days can you train per week is a question. And it's so hard to say where do we start with these questions because they all tie in with each other with that other stuff I was talking about. And so let's go through all of the questions and then we'll talk about it. How many days can you train per week? This could come down to your schedule. This could come down to you're a busy single mom and you've got a lot on your plate and you can't actually get to the gym that many times a week. It's fine. It's seriously fine. I've had clients get results with 1 or 2 days of training per week. It doesn't matter how many days you can get in. We can work with whatever it is. What I will say, and this is something that I would say in a non-Ehlers-Danlos discussion as well, be honest with how many days you can train per week, because if you're planning to train 6 days per week and the program's written for 6, but you only get in 1 or 2 because your schedule clashes, then you're actually missing out on some of those sessions. But it would be probably a bit better if we actually planned for 1 or 2, because then we can make the whole training week relatively complete, so to speak, or balanced. Or we can get you doing full body on each of those days so that if you do have to skip some days, you're not leaving out entire body parts, if that makes sense. Now, that's the non-Ehlers-Danlos side of it. The Ehlers-Danlos side of it says sometimes we have to skip sessions. That's okay. We just do the best that we can. We make up for it. It all comes out in the wash. It's not that serious. Like, people get so freaked out about, oh, we're missing this or I'm missing that. It's okay. We'll figure it out. Nobody's going to die here. We'll figure it out. So again, the Ehlers-Danlos body is so intuitive. We'll be able to figure it out even better than other people, I believe. How many days can you train per week? That's the first question. And this again comes to schedule, comes to your symptoms right now, and it also ties into some of these other things. You may actually want to increase your training days, but dependent on how much you can do in each session. How much recovery time do you need? Now, this might be per body part. It might be if you get really bad leg DOMS. When I say DOMS, it stands for delayed onset muscle soreness. So DOMS usually comes about, you do the training session. That day you feel fine. The next day you get a bit sore. The day after you get really sore, and then it kind of goes away after that. That's the pattern that we see with DOMS. Understanding that pattern can be helpful because it can lead to, oh my gosh, my back is sore after deadlifts. Oh, that's just DOMS. Or, oh my goodness, my back is sore after deadlifts. It's immediately sore during the session. That's actually not DOMS. That's something else. Maybe I should stop what I'm doing here. So how much recovery time do you need? And this can be, again, a general thing or a muscular thing. If you have a lot of DOMS in your muscles, you may need more time between those sessions. However, if you do less work per muscle group in those sessions, you may find that kind of fixes itself. As in, if you what I've got here, this body part split. What's a body part split? Monday is chest day, Tuesday is leg day, Wednesday is back day, Thursday is arms, Friday is another leg day. And maybe one leg day, it's more focused on the muscles at the back of your legs, and on the other leg day, it's more the front of the leg muscles. That's a body part split. It's also called a bro split or a bodybuilder training split. So the idea is that these bodybuilders, often on performance enhancing drugs, needs to be mentioned, not always, but traditionally on performance enhancing drugs, do these big workouts where they just smash their arms and smash their legs, and they can't walk after their leg session because they've worked their legs so hard, or they can't lift their arm up after their chest day because they've worked their chest muscles so hard. That might be too much work on a muscle group for you. It might not be. On the other hand, you might actually need that much recovery between each of your body parts, and you may find that a body part split is the best thing for you. However, what we can experiment with is where that tipping point is, where if you do 5 exercises for one same muscle group, 5 chest exercises in a session, is that the thing that's triggering the extreme DOMS? Or is it even if you just do one set of one exercise of chest, you get the extreme DOMS? Okay, if that's the case, let's do a body part split so that you have the full week to recover between chest exercises. On the other hand, if you are, okay, it's actually the 5 exercises of chest that made my chest get so exhausted and I can't handle it, then maybe we want to change to a full body split where you do just a little taste of chest and a little taste of legs and a little taste of shoulders and a little taste of back in a session. A full body split basically is we train the full body in each day, but we don't exhaust anything. We might do 1 leg exercise, 1 chest exercise, 1 back exercise, 1 ab exercise, and that's that day. And then the next session, we do a similar thing, but with slightly different muscle groups so that the full body is worked in each of those sessions. So How much recovery time do you need? That's a question that we can ask per body part or per full body. If you are, again, like I remember when I had long COVID, I had to be very careful about not doing training all the time. I couldn't train 2 days in a row. So I then, okay, if I have to have at least 1 day between my training sessions, that means that at a maximum I can train 4 days per week. But then every second week it's 3 days. So that's how that would determine how many days I can train per week. If I can only train every second day, that's it's just written there for me. Now, another question that we can ask that ties into that is how much work can you do in each session? If we only do a little bit of work in each session, 30 minutes workout, we may want to train a bit more frequently. You don't have to. I'm not here to tell you that you have to meet these quotas and you're naughty if you don't. That's how the normies do it. We're not doing it that way. If you can only train 30 minutes twice a week, that's okay. If that's what is under your threshold, that's okay. But knowing that can be really, really helpful. And it's okay to do those short sessions. And sometimes from a neurodivergent standpoint, that can be helpful as well. Sometimes I tell myself, just go in and do 30 minutes. You don't have to do a full hour and a half workout, just do 30 minutes of the essentials, and that's ticking it off. How much work can each body part handle in each session? That's sort of what we covered. The idea of like, should we exhaust a body part or not? And this is again, stepping away from, like Jade said in the chat here, skipping out of the session. We want to be able to walk or even skip out of the session, maybe a bit less work per body part, in which case a full body or an upper or lower split or whatever else, a non-body part split might help. And then of course, what feels good for you, because your body is very intuitive and you need to learn to listen to it. Listen to your body said from a non-Ehlers-Danlos normal body, quote unquote normal body, to an Ehlers-Danlos body is a bit patronizing, but listen to your body from an EDS person to another, I think is helpful. You know what your body wants. You've just been told other things, and it's taught you to not listen to what your body wants. So, okay, let's go through these different body part splits, and I'm going to, sorry, not body part splits, these different types of splits, and I'm going to talk about pros and cons of each very briefly. So body part split, I've already met a full body split. Sorry, I've already sort of given you a 101 of what this is. You train full body in each of these days. And it is not, to be clear, it's not every single body part. You don't have to hit biceps and triceps in each of those. It's just roughly a body segment is ticked off in each session. So you might do squats, bench press, row, tricep extensions, and that's that day. And then the next day you'll do deadlifts, lat pull down, shoulder press, biceps. And then the next day you might do leg extension, hamstring curl, some kind of like, I don't know, handstand push-ups or something like that, and chin-ups and calves. So it doesn't have to be everything. You don't have to do calves in every session and triceps in every session, but it's sort of roughly the full body gets a workout frequently. So let's talk about the pros of these. One of the pros is that this body part split, you get a little bit more within the session, you get a bit more recovery per body part. So you're not hammering down. Oh, sorry. I am completely skipping ahead. That was full body that I was talking about. That's very confusing for you all. Sorry. I just talked about full body split, but what we've got here is actually the first one is body part split. So actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain what each of these are, and then we'll go through the pros and cons, just so that those who don't know what they are have the context to understand what I'm comparing against. So body part split is what I talked about before. It's a bro split. Monday's chest day, International Chest Day. Tuesdays, hamstrings and glutes and calves. Wednesday is back day. Thursday is shoulders and arms. Friday is another leg day with quadriceps focus. That's a body part split. That's like how the bodybuilders do it, a bro split. Then we've got full body, which I just talked about, where you do a little bit, you dabble in roughly each body part per session. Another way of doing it, which is similar to body part, is upper lower, but now with this one day is a whole upper body day, the other day is a whole lower body day. So you might do pushing exercises, pulling exercises, arm exercises, shoulder exercises in your upper body day. In your leg day, you might do squats, hamstring curl, leg extensions, calf raises. And then you go back to an upper body day where you do different pushing and pulling upper body exercises. and then another lower body day, however many days a week per week you're doing, another lower body day where you do all lower body exercises. But basically on the lower body days, you do lower body, on the upper body days, you do upper body, and you don't really mix those. So that's an upper lower split. Push pull legs. This is a very common words that you'll hear in the fitness industry. Push, upper body pushing exercises, bench press, shoulder press, basically variations of those. Pull, upper body pull, rows, pull downs, back exercises, and sometimes people would put a deadlift on this day as well because they call deadlift a pulling exercise or a back exercise. And then a leg day, squats, leg press, leg extension, hamstring curl, calves. And that's how they would break the week up. Push day, pull day, legs day. And that may be a 3-day per week training. Or they may do 2 leg days in push pull, or 2 push days, or whatever it is. But basically that's how they're splitting their days up. And then we've got this other one, which is 1 main lift per day, which is sort of just a variation on some of these other ones where basically you have 1 main lift that you do, and then you just fill in the accessories however you like. So 1 day is squat day, 1 day is bench day, 1 day is deadlift day, 1 day is overhead press day, for example, and they're the main exercises. And then you can fill it in however you like. You can do chest exercises after your bench press day, leg exercises after your leg day, back exercises after your deadlift day, and then shoulder and arm exercises after your shoulder press day. Or you can do a mixed full body thing. So you can do, on your bench press day, you can then go and do 1 leg exercise, 1 back exercise, 1 arm exercise, and so forth. So you can mix that up however you like. But the idea of that one is that there's 1 main lift that you do. That's more of a powerlifting style of approaching training, where you've got your main lift and that's what you've really got to get done. And then you sort of fill in the accessories after that. And they're considered to be slightly less of a focus in that session. So these are just some examples of different ways that we can break our sessions up. Now let's go through the pros and cons of each of these. Body part split, which is again is like the bro split. So 1 body part roughly per training session. Pro is that you get more recovery within that week for that body part. So you do chest on Monday, you then have a whole week until you do chest again. So if you're someone who, no matter how much work you do on your muscles, even just 1 set gets you very sore, this may be a good way for you to do it. Although what you would want to be careful of is that you're not overdoing it in those sessions. And if your muscle soreness is really extreme after your training, to the point where it's like, there's got to be something wrong with me, it might actually be worth talking to a doctor about it. There is a condition, rhabdo, which is linked to that, which I actually am wondering if is linked to, I'm wondering if it's meant to be linked to this other stuff, with Ehlers-Danlos getting extra sore. And yes, Jade, it is meant to still be on this slide. So anyway, if you get really extreme muscle soreness after training, it may be worth talking to a doctor about. But if you're someone who needs a long time to recover between each body part, then a body part split may be helpful for you. You can train a lot of times in a week without muscle groups interfering with each other too much as well. So if you're someone who wants to go more frequently through the week, if it really feels good for your mental health, if it's an excuse for you to get out of the house, if you're someone who works from home and you don't normally get much incidental activity, if actually going to the gym makes your body feel so much better, that could be a way to do it, to break it up if you need that extra bit of recovery. And we can give ourselves like relief days, so to speak. For example, your arms day might just be a very, very light day that you can skip if you need to, but you've got it there if you want it. It can be just an excuse to go into the gym. You can actually do that with any of these training splits, but that's something that we can do with a body part split. The cons of a body part split is lots of workload for that body part in one session is typically how they're done. Because if you're doing just 1 body part per session, you're going to presumably do at least 2 or 3 exercises. 2 or 3 chest exercises in one session might be too much for you. 2 or 3 leg exercises in one session might be too much for you, not just from a muscle perspective, but from a total body mast cell flare up kind of perspective. So that may be a con. Body parts crossover. So people say, oh, well, I'm doing my chest and then my arms day. Well, your triceps are heavily involved in bench press. So there may actually be, it's not actually as strict as people say, this is this body part, that's that body part. Our body parts actually work together, so it may not be anywhere as strict. From From a performance and hypertrophy or muscle growth perspective, we've got less frequency. So generally speaking, if you want to increase your performance, we want to do that exercise more frequently to get better at that movement, to develop the skill of that, to get stronger at it, whatever it is. Sometimes that's not the case. I said before, Hafthor Bjornsson, he trains his deadlifts every fortnight because that's what he needs to recover. But if you can handle the recovery, doing something a bit more frequently gets us better at it from a performance standpoint. And from a muscle building standpoint, some people talk about slightly higher frequency can be beneficial for muscle growth. Sometimes, depending, again, it all varies from person to person. But then on the other hand, we've also got the thing how body parts cross over anyway. So it kind of works out, but yeah. Another con to the body part split, if we're being very strict with I'm just doing chest here, I'm just doing arms here, I'm just doing legs here, sometimes from an Ehlers-Danlos perspective, we need more frequency with something. For me, I basically want to go in and train my lower body every time I go to the gym, because that's what makes my hip feel so much better. That's what makes my whole body feel so much better, is getting that frequency in of my lower body. It might just be one little exercise, but getting that frequency in. So if we're being very strict with the body part split, that may not line up to what we need. And another con of the body part split is it usually requires more training days per week. As in, if we've got 5 body parts roughly, that means we should probably be doing 5 sessions per week. If you can only handle 3 sessions per week, a body part split might not be good for you. If you're someone who frequently has to skip entire sessions, a body part split might not be good for you, because that means leaving off an entire body part each time you skip a day. So that's our body part split. Then we've got a full body. Pros and cons of a full body training sessions, which is where we do the whole body in each session, roughly. We get lots of frequency. From a performance standpoint, we get to frequently practice these muscles, frequently practice these movements. Ehlers-Danlos seems to have a bit of a steep detraining slope where we forget how to do things pretty quickly. So if you're someone who's traveling a lot or something like that, this may be a great option for you, because you get to practice those frequently, even if you have to skip days. You still get to use your pushing muscles. You still get to use your pulling muscles. You still get to use your legs with a higher frequency. We can do small bite-sized parts per body part. So if you can't handle a lot of volume with your legs, we can just do a little bit in each session. This means that we can make the sessions less demanding. We can do higher frequency with these if we're careful, but I wouldn't be doing a full body split with a lot of work in it and 5 days or 6 days per week. If we're doing 5 or 6 days per week with a full body in each session, we want to reduce that back a little bit. So we're just doing a little bit. It can be really helpful if one body part needs a lot of frequency, for example, with me and my legs, like I said. So I do a full body training split at the moment, because I'm like, well, my legs need help from an Ehlers-Danlos standpoint. But then if I also don't do much upper body, then my ribs start subluxing. So I've got to do that. But then also my elbow started subluxing in my sleep. So I've got to take care of that. So this just allows me to do that. And then if I get a flare up and I get really bad fatigue or life gets in the way and I need to skip a whole half week of training, I know that I'm not leaving entire body parts out. And this is also a great option, a full body training split, if you can only train 1 or 2 days per week, because you're still covering everything really nicely. Cons is if you really, really, really get sore after each body part, even just a little bit of exposure, you may struggle with a full body split. And it feels a bit less like a pump workout. It feels a bit less like you're really getting in and getting your legs done, or really going in and getting your back done, which some people like, and enjoyment is a big factor here. If you can do it, and you enjoy that may be a con of this one. So the rest of them, we're just kind of going to brush through a little bit. We've got upper lower training or push pull legs. I'm going to put those roughly in the same category, because basically one of them is upper body, one of them is lower body, or in the other one, it's got 2 upper body days and 1 lower body day, but they're very distinct, upper versus lower. Pro is it's a nice balance with frequency, as in we can still get like frequently do our upper body, frequently do our lower body. But it is sort of in between the body part split and the full body. Mix up the movements it's an opportunity for us to, like, we can do like rowing exercises in both of those days, pushing exercises in both of those upper body days, and get a good basically amount of exposure to things. And from a training frequency for performance or for muscle growth standpoint, we can use that to actually then train the lifts, a pushing lift multiple times per week, a pulling lift multiple times per week, so that we get that extra frequency for performance and for muscle growth. A con of these types of training splits is from an EDS frequency standpoint. If you're someone who needs to train legs in every session in order to feel good, you're not going to get it with an upper lower split. If you're someone who actually, for me at the moment, I find getting my legs a bit more involved actually helps me with my upper body, because sometimes my upper body exercises trigger my hip. Because my issue is not really an upper body or a lower body issue. It's actually the meeting point between my upper body and my lower body that's the issue, my SIJ area. So from that standpoint, splitting it into upper body and lower body, I don't actually get to do what I need to do. I don't get to combine them well. The big lower body training sessions in an upper lower split may be a trigger for MCAS and other symptoms. And it might be too much of one body part per session. You might find that you do 2 sets of upper body, two exercises worth of upper body exercises, and then your shoulder stabilizing muscles get so fatigued that they can't continue. So in that case, doing a little bit of exposure with a full body session might actually be better for you, rather than forcing your whole upper body to be switched on and performing for a full hour. That's a lot of requirements on your shoulder stabilizing muscles, or your ab stabilizing muscles for your lower body, or your hip stabilizing muscles for your lower body. So it might be that we need to actually give those little stabilizing muscles a bit more of a rest and do more of a full body session. Now, the 1 main lift per day, it's great for a neurodivergent brain. We get to just focus in on one thing and we know what we're doing. It's not good if something interferes with that. If our shoulder plays up and we can't bench that day, our hip plays up and we can't squat or deadlift that day. It's very versatile, so we can arrange the accessories afterwards however we need. And also another great thing with it is we go in, we get our main lift done. Awesome. If we're completely pooped at the end of that, or something flares up at the end of that, we actually can just say, I've done what I need to do for today. I'm going to walk away and I can do my accessories later the day or another day or something like that. Another con of it is if we have to skip a whole day, we risk skipping the whole deadlift day or the whole squat day and not actually doing those lifts in that week. One other thing I'll mention is for trainers, if you're working with a client, something like a full body split might be a nice option, because you get to, if you're just seeing them 1 day per week, you might only ever get to see them for squat day and never get to see their bench or deadlift day. So that's something to factor in as well, is how many times as a trainer, how many times are you seeing them per week? How many of their lifts do you actually need to overlook? And you may choose their split according to that, based on what they need. So hopefully I haven't lost anyone yet, but these are just some of the pros and cons to these different types of splits. And as I said before, there's a recording for this, so you can always go back and rewatch over it. So that's the step 1. We pick our split. How many days do you want to train per week? How do we want to break that up? How much can your body handle in each session? We've picked that. Let's say you want to train 4 days per week and it's a full body split. That's the example that we're going to go ahead with. So the next thing that we want to do, we know how many days we're training per week. We know roughly how we're breaking the body parts up across that training week. Now we can fill in the exercise categories. What are the exercise categories? It's actually something we mentioned in the Bendy and Strong program. So if you are in the current cohort, we haven't covered it yet. If you're in past cohorts, you may have forgotten about it. But basically, we have these different movement categories, and they sort of make up a balanced program. So this is an idea that I've stolen from Sebastian Oreb, who I know was inspired by Sebastian Oreb, who was inspired by strength sensei. What's his name? Sorry, I've got to not skip over his name, because he actually really did a lot of this stuff. What's his name? Sorry. Does anyone know? No, people don't know. I don't know. I've just had a mental blank and I can't remember this person's name, but he is like one of the most foundational people in strength training who everyone references back to. Charles Poliquin. There we go. None of the responses had his name in it that I was looking up, but Charles Poliquin, he's sort of the one who made this idea of structural balance or building a structurally balanced body very popular, and different coaches have interpreted it differently. The person who I was exposed to it through was Sebastian Oreb. It's sort of a common sense idea, but the way that they talk about it is in a relatively structured way. So what does it mean? We have these different categories of different body parts, and if we include each of these categories in our training program, we're going to be roughly balanced. If we go 5 exercises from one and only 1 exercise from another, that's now throwing the balance off. So if we do a whole bunch of pushing exercises and we don't balance it out with pulling exercises, that's now throwing the balance off. So we want to build this roughly structurally balanced body. So a good thing to do is just to choose 1 from each of these categories. Another thing we can take into account is if you do a lot of a particular movement in your everyday life. If you're a boxer, you're doing a lot of pushing. Therefore, we probably need to do some additional pulling on top of the balanced 1 of each category to balance that out, because that's going to create an unbalance otherwise. So from a how do I build a program standpoint, how do I know? One of the questions that we asked at the start was, how do I know that I'm including everything correctly? Well, if we include roughly 1 from each of these categories, we'll be in a pretty good place to start. So this brings me to the PDF that I have put in the notes for today. And that is the list of different exercises for each of these categories. Now, this is not an exhaustive list at all. It was literally just one that I actually came up with not much time spent on it. But I didn't want to overload anyone with too many ideas and make it too confusing, but that's just some exercises that are in there. So these are our different categories, and I'll skip ahead because this is color coded, so it's a bit easier to see. I don't know why these dots are black, just ignore that. So we've got our upper body pushing exercises here in light blue. Horizontal, pushing, basically bench press style exercises. Vertical, pushing up overhead, shoulder press exercises. Then we've got our, this is in the wrong spot. This is supposed to be here. The 45 degree and below 45 degree, that's supposed to be next to the, let me just actually correct that because I can do it whilst I'm here. That's for these, because the pressing exercises is where we think of that, and not necessarily for the pulling exercises. Just bear with me, sorry. Okay. All fixed. Okay, so basically horizontal push is anything where we're pressing, if you think of like a, you're lying down on the bench doing a bench press, if it's below 45 degree angle, anything below that, that's more of a horizontal push. Once we get from 45 degrees and above, that's more of a vertical push. So just as a rough guide, I did give slightly different guide categories in the Bendy and Strong course. You can use either one. This is a bit more simple than what I gave in the Bendy and Strong course. I use planes of movement in the Bendy and Strong course to divide these up, but I think this is a bit more simple. So we've got, if we include 1 horizontal press and 1 vertical press, so we do a bench press exercise, a shoulder press exercise, we want to balance it out with a pulling exercise. So a good ratio to use with our upper body push and pull is a 1-to-1 ratio at the very least. You might choose a 2-to-1 ratio where you do 2 pulls for 1 push, as in 2 pulling exercises for 1 push. But I wouldn't do the other way around. I wouldn't do extra pushing and only 1 pulling, because that's when we get the muscle imbalances with the shoulder, and it's just not so nice. So we've got our horizontal pull, which is like our rows. And we've got our vertical pulls, which is our lat pull down, chin up style exercises. So one of these, and we want to keep this pink and blue roughly balanced. So yeah, Emma, you'll have the recording to watch back on. Then we've got our shoulder rotation, and this one I haven't really filled in whether we need. There's external rotation, we've got internal rotation. I don't want to tell you that you have to do one or have to do another. Naturally, we have a natural bias to be weaker in our external rotators, because a lot of our big muscles that we use for pushing and pulling are actually internal rotators. We talk about that in the course. So we naturally just have to do a bit of extra external rotation work in order to make things balanced, just based on the exercises that we would do in a session anyway. But some of you may find that you have a certain imbalance in your shoulder where you need extra external rotation, or it may flip the other way and you actually need more internal rotation. But we want to include some shoulder rotation according to your needs. Some external, some internal. Now, then we've got our elbow flexion, biceps and triceps. And in the course, I mentioned that if we had to choose one of these and had to leave one of them off, I would say do your biceps over your triceps, just because that prevents elbow subluxations and also can help to prevent elbow subluxations. And also we get a lot of tricep work with all of our pressing exercises. We do work our biceps and our elbow flexors a little bit with our pulling exercises, but maybe to a bit of a lesser degree. So those are our upper body categories. So we choose one exercise from each of these, and that's what the PDF guide that I've got in today's session is. It's got if you go to the resources tab in today's session, it'll have each of these categories with some exercises in it, which we'll go through in a sec. So then we've got our midsection. We've got anti-extension exercises. So that's basically ab exercises that stop us from arching our back. So I put it as anti-extension rather than flexion, because flexion is probably not as functional for us in what we need as is anti-extension. So remember, we can flex our spine, we can extend our spine. Those two movements are paired. Our muscles that prevent extension are our flexion muscles. So rather than saying we're going to work our torso flexors, we're going to say we're going to work our torso anti-extension muscles, because that's a more functional way. In day-to-day movements, in strength exercises in the gym, we're rarely creating flexion. What we need our abs for is from preventing us from arching back. What we need our side abs for is to prevent us from falling down to the side. If you think of carrying groceries in one hand, you're not actively doing a side bend. You're actually actively preventing a side bend. You're actively preventing yourself from falling down to one side. So that's why I've got it in as the anti-muscles. Limbs create movement, torso restricts movement is a general way of thinking of this. So we've got our anti-extension muscles, anti-rotation muscles on our front. So with exercises like the shoulder tap plank or a Turkish get up that work these rotational front muscles, as in our abs that control rotation. Then we've got our back anti-rotation muscles. So things like a bird dog, a renegade row, or a single arm unsupported dumbbell row. So if we're doing a bent over dumbbell row without a bench and we're just doing it with one side, that's really working our back muscles, holding us in that spot to prevent us from rotation, which is what the weight is pulling us into. Then we've got our anti-lateral flexion exercises like our suitcase carry, our side plank, things like that. One from each of these boxes, so we're not leaving anything out. You may find you need more of some, and with some of these, you may actually be intolerant to some. You may find that every time you do your anti-lateral flexion, it triggers your back. Okay, cool. We'll just leave that out for now. But know that we're working towards having this balanced and including everything in the program. Then with our lower body, we've got our hinge exercises, and we can break them down into deadlift style exercises and just general hinge exercises. And again, in the list of those, which I'll show up on the screen in a second, we've got things like hip thrust, cable glute kickback, some of the warm-up exercises that we did, things like that. Then we've got our squat pattern, and I've called it a pattern because it's not just squats. It's leg press, lunges, things like that, where our knees and our hips are bending together. They do with deadlift, but it's a little bit more of a hip focus with deadlift. Squat is knees and hips in synchrony, equal parts knee and hip. Deadlift is more, let's say 70% hip, 30% knees, or depending on the variation that we do. Then we've got our knee flexion exercises or our hamstring exercises. So exercises where we're bending our knee. And then we've got exercises where we're extending our knee. Then we've got calves, and then we've got some foot exercises as well. So this is a bit different. This structural balance plan is different from what Sebastian Orob teaches. It's different from what Strength Sensei teaches. It's its own thing. This is what I've built out roughly more for people with Ehlers-Danlos. But if you don't know where to start with your program, pick an exercise from each of these categories, and that's great. If you're experienced at training, making sure you're including all of these in your program, that's great. If we're working around Ehlers-Danlos fluctuations, that's where these categories really start to shine. We can substitute things in and out depending on the category. So we have step one, which is pick your split. So we've got, let's say the example that we're going to use is a full body split. So full body training 4 days per week. Step 2 is fill in the exercise categories. What categories are going to fall under that? So if we were doing a push-pull legs, we would say, okay, I'm training 3 days per week. 1 day's pushing upper body, 1 day's pulling upper body, 1 day's legs. So on my push day, I'm going to include a horizontal push and a vertical push and an arm exercise. On my pull day, I'm going to include a vertical push, a horizontal push, and a deadlift exercise and another arm exercise. On my leg day, I'm going to include whatever's left: squat pattern, knee flexion, knee extension, calves, feet, and these ab exercises and the shoulder rotation. We can maybe include that on the warm-up days for our upper body day. So that way I've ticked off every one of these categories, right? And I can see questions about standing ab exercises, which is actually very exciting because I've got some really good ones that I've come up with recently. We'll get to that at the end. So that's an example with a push-pull legs day, how to include these different categories in. Now, an example that I've got written out here, which is why I've got the color coding, is if a 4-day split, full body on each of those days. So, because it's full body, we're probably going to be doing upper body and lower body on each day. So we're going to need to warm up our upper body and our lower body on each day. That's another thing that may make you choose one training split over another. If you find that it takes a long time to warm up a whole body part and you need to do all body parts in one training day, it might be too much. That said, we don't need to do extensive warm-ups sometimes. We can taper our warm-ups down to just what's necessary and maybe cover different warm-ups on different days so that we hit all of these boxes across the training week. But that's a bit of a different discussion. So the whole idea is that basically within the training week, we're hitting everything that we need. So we've got our shoulder rotation, which we're going to do as part of our warm-up. That might be the lock big 3 that we do on this day. On this day, we might do our external rotation and our internal rotation with the cable. On this day, we might do something else. On this day, we might go back and do the lock big 3, something like that. Our abs, we might do on day 1, anti-extension. On day 2, anti-lateral flexion. On day 3, anti-rotation. And on day 4, our back muscle anti-rotation exercises like bird dog, renegade row, things like that. And that could also be included as our warm-up, or it could be an actual exercise, or with Ehlers-Danlos, sometimes the lines get blurred and it's a bit of both. Then we might do, so far we've ticked off our rotation. We've ticked off this one and we've ticked off all of these. So we've got the other exercises to fill in now. So coming down, we'll do our upper body push vertical. Then on the next day, we'll do our upper body push horizontal. So this might be a barbell overhead press. This might be a dumbbell bench press. Upper body push vertical, upper body push horizontal. So we're keeping those roughly balanced. If you're someone who can't do much vertical pressing, you might have 3 of these days are horizontal and the other one's vertical. What exercises you do within these, we're going to fill that in a second. But for right now, we're just thinking about the categories to make sure that we're balancing everything across the training week. Then we'll do an upper body pull vertical, upper body pull horizontal, upper body pull vertical, upper body pull horizontal. You don't have to pair these so that you're doing a vertical pull and a horizontal a horizontal push and a horizontal pull on the same day. You can mix that up. You don't even have to do horizontal push and pull on both days. This might be a pushing day. This might be a pulling day where you do just pushing exercises, just pulling exercises, just pushing, just pulling. It doesn't have to be like this. This is just an example. Then in terms of our lower body stuff, because now we've ticked off all of these upper body exercises, except for arms, which we'll include in a little bit, but we've still got squat, legs, calves, feet, and arms to go. So we'll include squat here and deadlift here. We've spaced them a bit further apart so that they're a bit more recovery between them because they're bigger exercises. We'll do our calves on this day, knee extension, feet, knee flexion, and then we'll just do elbow flexion, elbow extension, something like that. So we're just filling in the categories just to make sure that we're hitting everything. Because if we go for the exercises first, unless you're naturally thinking this structurally balanced way, you might miss things out. So we fill in the categories first. And then we can actually take a look at this and think, oh dear, that's a lot of work on all those days. I'm actually going to take out one of these days because that's too much for me to do within the week. Or what I'm going to do is actually only train one vertical push per week. So I'm going to eliminate this vertical push we could do it like this. So I'm going to eliminate this. I'm going to eliminate this. Then I'm going to eliminate this and then eliminate this. So it might end up looking like that. You might think, oh, that's too much work for me, for my upper body. So I'm just going to do one upper body vertical pull, upper body horizontal push, upper body vertical push, upper body horizontal pull. Different orders, whatever. Doesn't matter with the order too much. So this is how we can start to fill in the categories and know that we're roughly hitting these as we need to. Now, the next step is to make a list of exercises for these categories. Now, the way that most people would do it, the way that non-Ehlers-Danlos people would do it, is once they've got these categories here, they'll just pick an exercise and prescribe it, and that's it. You're run and done. For our upper body pull, we're going to do a lat pull down. For our upper body push horizontal, it's going to be a barbell flat bench press. For our upper body push vertical, it's going to be a barbell overhead press. For our upper body pull horizontal, it's going to be a bent over barbell row, and that's your prescription, and that's what we're going to do for the next four to 6 weeks. You can't change that. With Ehlers-Danlos, that doesn't really play out very well a lot of the time. You may have something sublux and you can't do it properly. It might be this weird mast cell thing where all of a sudden I can't deadlift 2 weeks in a row or 2 sessions in a row. I have to swap it out. For 1 week I can do deadlift. The next week I have to do a squat, or the next week I have to do a leg press or something different. And I can't actually balance this out very well. So this is where I think the hack, and this is very different from how I've seen anyone else program because Ehlers-Danlos needs something different, is to come up with a list of exercises for each of these categories. Do this ahead of time because we want to reduce the mental load within your training session. Come up with a list, and then on the day, you can select one of these exercises to do. How do you know which one? I think over time, you'll get very intuitive and be able to feel it. But there's also ways that I've also got things to help you know how to choose which exercise. So we come up with a list of exercises for each category. These are safe exercises that you know you can do. May not be every day you can do them, but you know that you can tolerate them okay. For example, there are certain exercises that just my body does not like right now. Conventional deadlift, I can't do. Sumo barbell deadlift, I can't do. Trap bar deadlift, I can do. So for me, on my deadlift list, it's a trap bar deadlift. It's not a conventional deadlift because that's not one I can do right now. So make a list of exercises for each category. This means that we have the flexibility to pick exercises that work for us on the day. You might be more, let's go back to where we were here. You might be more in the I've got a good amount of momentum stage, and momentum, AKA my mast cells aren't playing up stage, and I can do exercises consistently. In that case, prescribe yourself an exercise for that, but still come up with a little list of alternatives if you absolutely need them. If you're more like me and you know that you can't do things consistently right now, you know you have to be flexible with your approach, this list is actually a shopping list for each day. I can pick from any of these and do them. And it's okay. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not going off program by doing a different exercise, but I know that I'm picking it from the correct category so that I'm roughly still hitting things in a balanced way. So we come up with a list of exercises for each category. By making a list of exercises ahead of time, we reduce mental load during the session. You might need to be looser with your categories. For example, some kind of compound leg exercise. What does compound mean? It's mean multi-joint. So some kind of compound leg exercises, squat and deadlift, fall into this category, and leg press. That's how I'm doing it at the moment. A leg exercise. So when we come back here, this is why I color-coded them how I did. These are a compound leg exercise. These are more single joint leg exercises. These are some kind of pushing exercises. These are some kind of pulling exercises. This is some kind of arm exercise, some kind of ab exercise. We may not have the luxury of being able to say, oh, well, I can do this deadlift, but not that deadlift. We may not be able to do any deadlifts, and we may have to do a squat instead. So you may need to be looser with these categories and just go, instead of reading the words that I've put here, just read the colors that I've put here. according to this. So if you want to screenshot that page, there's your opportunity, or you'll have it in the recording anyway. And then if you want to screenshot this, I mean, this is just a sample, but to give you the example of sometimes you might color code, or sometimes you might use the words. If you go slightly cross-eyed and you can't see any of the words, you can just see the colors. That might be what you go off. So I just do something orange on this day. I just do something green here. I just do something purple here. And it's going to depend on what I can actually do that day. This is still a valid way to make progress in the gym. And I want to push back against this idea that's been really rampant in the fitness industry recently, that you need to follow a very structured program. You need to do the same thing each week. Back in the day, back in like the 80s, 90s, early 2000s, there was this idea that you need to shock your muscles into growing. It was this bodybuilding approach where they said, oh, you need to do something different each session, and it needs to shock your muscles into growth. That's not entirely correct. But what happened as a result of it was the fitness industry, it always swings as a pendulum. So the pendulum swung into shock your muscles, do something random in each session. And now the fitness industry has swung back the other way, and they say, no, you need to be so structured that you do the same thing in each week after week, and that you need to measure progress. If you cannot see it written on paper that you've done progressive overload, you have not progressively overloaded, therefore you haven't built muscle, therefore you're going to get no results and you're not going to go anywhere. As usual, the answer lies somewhere in the middle. This way of training is actually very similar to how bodybuilders train. When I was training under my coach, Charlie Duca, the bodybuilding coach that I had, he's one of the best coaches, the best bodybuilders and coaches in Australia. And I'd go in for my training sessions with him face to face, and he'd say, what are we doing today? Legs. Okay, cool. I'm like, do you want to see my program that you wrote for me? He's like, nah, we'll go off program today. We'll just do. He had this rough category thing already in his head. He knew roughly what we needed to cover, some kind of compound leg exercise, some kind of isolation leg exercise, balance the front and back, balance the top and bottom, and off we go. So this is a very valid way to make progress in the gym. And we need to push back against this squeezing every ounce of performance out of every single thing that we constantly do. Sometimes that's not actually the way that our bodies are designed to go. To squeeze yes, ideally, if I had a client who wanted to total 500 kilos in 12 weeks at a powerlifting competition, yeah, I would get them on a very structured, rigid program, because we do need to squeeze every ounce of performance out of them. But when we're doing it like this, when you're not trying to be a certain thing at a certain date and exactly that, we don't need that rigidity. And especially if that rigidity is holding you back and forcing you to feel like you're failing and you're not good enough and you're not able to do this and you're not able to make progress. This is how a lot of bodybuilders train. And remember what I said before, the cross-sectional area of a muscle has a pretty much direct relationship with how much potential for strength that muscle has. So if your goal is strength training, building muscle is going to help. If your goal is to look a certain way, building muscle is going to help. If your goal is to prevent dislocations, building muscle is going to help. Your body doesn't know that last week you did a conventional deadlift and this week you're doing a sumo deadlift, and it's not going to be like, oh, whoa, you know what? We can't progress. I'm sorry, you're mixing things up on me too much. No, if that's what your body needs, that's what we can do. Yes, if we want to track a linear progression of a particular exercise, we do need to do it consistently. But if you can't do that right now, it's totally okay. Remember, which stage are you in? This is not a forever thing necessarily. Which stage are you in? Are your mast cells playing up right now? Is your body all over the place? We need to listen to that and respond to that. And hopefully, if we're working with a doctor to get our mast cells stabilized, if we're doing the right kind of training, everything will stabilize a little bit better. As an exercise scientist, I can't help but think that exercise would probably have a beneficial effect on mast cell activation syndrome as well. I don't know exactly what it is, but exercise science tells us that exercise has basically a positive effect on almost everything. So by getting into exercise and building that regularity, it's going to help us to be more regular. And then we can translate over to a program that has something a little bit more regular. And in fact, dare I say it, you may actually be able to use this as a way to track your symptoms. Are you doing deadlift every 7 weeks because that's all you can handle? Or if in 6 months' time you can actually do deadlift every week, that might actually be an indication that your symptoms have improved, that your mast cells are more stabilized, or whatever it is more stabilized. So we make a list of exercises for each category. Jade said it in the chat. It's an EDS buffet program. Yes. And let's go over to our guide for that, which I'll just share here really quickly. One moment, please. There's not too much to go, by the way. If your brains are feeling a bit overloaded, there's not too much more to go. So again, this is a very rough guide. It's not exhaustive. In fact, there's things that I already thought of that I wanted to add, but I ran out of time to add them this morning, but that's okay. So we've got these different categories, some movements for each one. Now, I've included this column for the upper body exercises. This is not the same movement, but it does work the same muscles roughly. I didn't include it for the midsection and the lower body because it kind of doesn't apply as well there. But for the upper body, for example, if you can't do any chest pressing exercises, maybe we can do a chest fly or a dumbbell pullover or something instead to work those muscles. In the Bendy and Strong course, we talk about doing the movement approach, then following it up with the muscle approach. Substitute the movement, but failing that, we can substitute the muscle in. So if you can't do an overhead dumbbell press, maybe we can do a lateral raise instead. Horizontal pull, something like a face pull can be alternative. If you can't do a lat pull down because whenever you put your arms overhead, you get POTS flare up, we could do instead a straight arm lat pull down, which is not quite the same. It's not actually working the same movement, but it's roughly working the same muscles, so we can sort of include it. So that's what that category there is for, but it doesn't really apply with the lower body stuff because the lower body is so mixed anyway, that it doesn't really work as well for that. And the midsection is the same as well. There's a lot more crossovers with the different muscles. Whereas with our upper body exercises, if we're pushing, we're using the muscles on the front and not really the muscles on the back. If we're pulling, we're using the opposite, the muscles on the back, not really the muscles on the front. Whereas with our lower body, if we're squatting, we're using the same muscles as if we deadlift, just in a different way. So that's why I didn't have that extra category there for the lower body and midsection. But those are just some exercises just to give you a start. Now, how do you do these exercises? That's another question. You can look up guides online. What I want to do is, as part of the alumni network for Bendy and Strong, is have a whole library on exercises, these exercises and cues that I use for hypermobile people for these exercises. And also to run a course on it so I can run you through it in live and then have it there as a guide. So if you like that, let me know. And that's something that I can build into the alumni network that you're all welcome to be a part of. And like I said, there's paid options and free options. So it should be something that's affordable for everyone. Sorry if I sound really nasally. I've just had a cold, so my voice is kind of going in and out a little bit, but that's okay. Feels like I'm drowning, but I'm not. So let's go recap the steps. Step 1, pick your split. How many days per week and how are you going to break that up into the different body parts? Step 2, fill in the exercise categories. And you can fill them in according to the words or according to the colors, whichever you need. That's just an example of step 2. Step 3, make a list of exercises for that category. So we've got our list there and you can either pick one or keep it as a list. Step 4, how many sets and how many reps? I think this is a bit less important for a lot of us. It kind of all comes out in the wash, and building any capability is going to help us. Low reps can build muscle. High reps can build muscle. Low reps build strength. High reps can contribute to strength. High reps build endurance. Low reps can contribute to endurance. So it's kind of, it all sort of works out. What I would say is an easy starting point is 2 to 4 sets of 5 to 10 reps. 10 reps is on the higher end of what I'd recommend for Ehlers-Danlos, definitely with beginners. If you're a beginner, start off with lower reps. 2 to 4 sets is okay. Compound and complex exercises equals do fewer reps or sets. Do fewer reps per set. So eat, for example, less than 8 is fewer. So what do I mean by compound or complex? Something like a squat, something like a deadlift, something like a bench press, overhead press. These are more complex exercises, and they're also compound exercises because they're multi-joint. Why do we do less reps with these? Because there's more moving parts that can go wrong. And when we get to the higher rep ranges with Ehlers-Danlos, this is something we cover in the course, later on in the course. If we get to the higher reps, this is where things can go wrong. So doing fewer reps per set for compound exercises is what I would recommend. You have to earn the right to do higher reps, as in it's not something that we can just go in and start doing. We have to know that we have the capacity and the tolerance for those exercises. This is where I see a lot of rehab specialists get it wrong. They think, oh, this person's fragile, I'm going to give them low weight, high reps. That's usually where we get it wrong, because we end up doing compensations, because we are experts at compensating, master compensators with Ehlers-Danlos, and we end up compensating when it gets to the higher reps, which means that we use the wrong muscles, which means that it kind of defeats the purpose of doing the exercise, because the exercise was to train a certain muscle to do what it was supposed to do. Now, this is something that I recommend for everyone, but especially for people with EDS, and it's an extended thing I recommend for EDS, a ramp up period or an exposure period when you first start a new program or add in a new exercise. What does this mean? Zero expectation training. Go in and do one set of the exercise. Touch the weight, feel the equipment, set up in it. Don't get a pump, don't get exhausted. Walk away, skip away, run away, jump away from the exercise. Don't crawl away from the exercise. Just give your body exposure to it. This is something I've discovered that I needed to do. Again, it's one of those things where intuitively I found that I needed to do it. Now it makes sense with this whole I'm allergic to exercise thing. If you do too much of it, A, you might go beyond your capacity on that day and compensate with other muscles. B, it may be the mast cell flare up or something similar flaring up as a result of it, but include yourself in this ramp up period. If I took 6 months off training, seriously training, and I came back in and started a program, my ramp up period would be 3 weeks at least. 3 weeks of going in with zero expectations and just feeling my way around the exercises. Every time I've skipped this, even if I'm a high level athlete, every time I've skipped it, I've gotten injured. Reduce the expectations in the first little bit. If you're just adding in a new exercise and you're pretty well trained and you've got good momentum, and you're just adding in a new exercise, it might be 1 to 2 weeks. The first 1 to 2 weeks of that exercise, it's just exposure. If I know I want to add in another exercise, if I'm like working on a current program and I know I've got a deadlift only competition coming up and I know I want to do deadlifts at some point, but I'm not up to the point of doing them yet, I might slowly just in a couple of workouts do one set of deadlifts really light and easy. Just adding in a little bit here and there. We need exposure before we start challenging. Exposure is very, very important with Ehlers-Danlos. When it comes to reps and sets, where you start is less important than how you progress. Don't get too hung up on, oh, I'm supposed to be doing high reps of this exercise. No, start with low reps. Build your ability to do the exercise. With Ehlers-Danlos, there's so much low-hanging fruit. Just building our ability to do an exercise is going to make a whole world of difference for us, let alone fine-tuning it with the higher reps or whatever else. There is no magic rep scheme, but different reps can achieve different things. And the reps depend on the individual exercise, your capacity, which fluctuates from day to day, and your goal as well. We're going to go a little bit more into reps in the next session that we do of this. But here's a general guide. Low reps, 5 or less, is good for strength because we build the skill of being really strong. It's good for skill development because we don't have the opportunity to get fatigued and compensate. We stop before that fatigue kicks in. And it's great for muscles that easily fatigue. If you know that your shoulder muscles, your shoulder stabilizing muscles can't handle high reps, then don't do high reps of a bench press, because you'll get to the higher reps of a bench press and these little muscles will fatigue. They'll say, hey, I could only handle 5 reps. I can do 5 reps of heavy, but I can't do 8 reps of light. That's exceeding my capacity. And then those little muscles will get fatigued and then your technique will dip down and not be so good. Then we've got our mid reps, 5 to 8. Which are good for building capacity. Now, most people would say this is 5 to 12, but this is the Ehlers-Danlos version. The Ehlers-Danlos, I would say mid reps is 5 to 8. These are once you can do, you need tolerance for the exercise in order to do 5 to 8. But once you can do the exercise, that's when we can start building capacity. And higher reps, again, most people would say is 15 plus for endurance. With Ehlers-Danlos, I would put it around 9 plus. This will test our endurance. And again, that's in inverted commas because that's the Ehlers-Danlos version of endurance, but use with caution for some or even most exercises. So the one exercise that comes to mind that you can often do higher reps on is like a leg extension. That's kind of one of the only ones. I see a lot of non-Ehlers-Danlos people using lateral raise as an example. Oh, you wouldn't do just 6 reps of a lateral raise. Yes, I would. Watch me. I do it regularly because they say, oh, that's just too easy. Or 6 reps of a bicep curl, you wouldn't do that. I did this week. Yes, exactly that. Because for me, it's the shoulder blade stabilizing muscles, the smaller muscles that are likely to fatigue at that point. With leg extension, it's less of a thing because there's less muscles involved in stabilizing. But I was actually going to make a list of exercises here. I was like, these are the exercises that this doesn't apply to. And then I thought about it and I'm like, leg extension is sort of the only one that I can think of that falls outside of this. There may be others, maybe tricep extension, but even then I often keep that to 6 reps. I don't know if someone can think of this in the chat. Let me know which exercises. Actually, Kristen's just said for the muscle activation, for some of the lock big 3, that's maybe one that we can go slightly higher reps with, but I still suggest that you start with lower reps to build your ability to do them. So I would say if you have momentum in your training, this is your chance to actually build ability to start to build out your endurance with it. Because if we think about that, the limiting factor with a bench press, overhead press, bicep curl, tricep extension is not the muscle that we're working, but our stabilizing muscles around our shoulder, not having the endurance. If you have momentum in your training, and you can do these more endurance rep ranges, then it's probably a good idea to challenge a variety of rep ranges in your warm-up activations so that you actually build up that endurance in those smaller muscles so that it carries over to bench press, squats, deadlift, etc. When I had high momentum in my training, I could do 20 rep sets or 30 rep sets of bench press or 30 rep sets. My favorite thing to do was a 50 to 100 rep set of leg press. It was just fun. It was a bit masochistic, but it was fun. That's what I like to do, but I don't have momentum, so I can't do that right now. So to answer your question, Kristen, hopefully that answers it. With the activation exercises, that's probably like the first one that you can actually, that's like your foot in the door to start training endurance because they're pretty low load and pretty comfortable and pretty safe. Sarah said standing calf raises is another one that you can do a high reps of, and that's, I would agree, calf exercises. I mean, calves are built to be high endurance anyway, because when we walk, it's like a constant, just like calf raise after calf raise. So that's another one, but I can't think of many other ones that you can do that many reps with. So that falls very different. That's a very strong deviation from how a lot of coaches would teach it, but this is an Ehlers-Danlos workshop. So let's recap the steps again, because I was going to make a whole slide that had all the steps there, but I forgot. Step 1, pick your split. Know how many days you're training per week, and you've split the body parts up accordingly. Step 2, fill in the exercise categories. Make sure we're roughly getting one from each of these categories. And again, we can use the words or we can use the colors. Step 3, make a list of exercises for each category. If you've got momentum, you can pick an exercise. If you don't, we leave it as a list. Step 4, how many sets and reps? It's less important and it will vary per exercise. So if we're doing the list, if we're doing the exercise buffet, and on the day we're picking an exercise, that may change it. We may have leg extension and instead we choose a hamstring curl. Well, I keep my hamstring curl reps very low, whereas my leg extension reps can go a bit higher. They can go low as well though. That's another thing, is they can. So step 4, how many reps and sets? That's a bit less important. Start low. Start low. Do your ramp up period. Do your exposure period. That's your chance to figure out how many reps and sets you need. And then over time, we can just slowly progress them. We can say, well, I did 6 reps of this last week at this weight. This week, I can't increase the weight. I might do 7 reps. Sweet. That's a progression. Now, step 5. Let's rate your capacity. This step is optional. Kind of. It's optional in the sense that it's not something that I necessarily do formally, but I might actually try it and see if it works. So what we're doing with this step 5 is we're actually coming up with a compass, I guess, to give us direction with our training. So we've got the map. Now we need a compass, because the map is the ideal world, or where we're, the instructions. The compass connects us to that map. It tells us where we're oriented currently and therefore which instructions we should follow. Another way of thinking of it is like a legend or a key for a map. It gives us instructions on how to interpret this information. And this is going to vary from person to person, and I'd love to hear everyone's different ideas on how they do this. Basically, the idea is we come up with some kind of rating scale to determine your capacity on any given day. For example, I'm going to rate my POTS symptoms out of 10 today. Fatigue out of 10. Pain or overall or joint-specific pain out of 10. So with these, it may be out of 10, or it might be that if my heart rate hits this when I stand up, this means I'm at this level out of 10. With my fatigue, if I jump out of bed, it's a 1. If I crawl out of bed, it's a 10, and whatever is in between, I grade that. If I had to cancel at least 3 things this week, my fatigue is at this out of 10. If I slept X amount of time, or if I had, fatigue and sleep is a whole complicated thing because often it can cause insomnia, which is a whole other issue in itself. So you may just work your symptoms out according to that. It may not be out of 10. It may be a color rating, whether a symptom is present or not, how much it interferes with your life. But we're coming with some kind of rating scale that you can do on the day to help you choose which exercises you're going to do. Then we can roughly, and this is all done ahead of time, allocate certain symptoms with certain exercises. For example, if my POTS is 5+, I eliminate overhead pressing, if that's a trigger for you, or overhead pulling, or I choose lying down exercises again, if that's a trigger for you. If my head pressure is high, I'm not going to do a barbell squat today. If my head pressure is high, I'm going to choose another squat within that category that doesn't involve me bracing, because bracing is such an important part of a barbell squat. And I don't want to have that, if I can't brace because my head pressure is going to explode, then I can't do the exercise properly. Now that's putting my body at risk because I'm not actually bracing properly for the barbell squat, which means that I'm not going to be squatting properly, which means that I'm going to, other problems are going to arise. So on that day, I'm going to choose another squatting variation that doesn't require bracing. I have my high pressure ab exercises that I do. They're the ones that I'm upright for. On my high pressure days, I'm more upright for my ab exercises. On my ankle subluxing days, I don't choose a barbell squat. I might choose a squat that takes my ankle out of it, or even just a leg extension and a hamstring curl instead. So the idea is that we roughly calculate what these symptoms are, what our interference symptoms are. And this is going to vary from person to person. If you don't have POT symptoms, right now, I don't really have POT symptoms. They're not going to be here for me. If we have, I've got an ankle that subluxes. If that's subluxing a lot, I'm going to be extra careful. If I have hives on my face, I know that my histamine or my mast cells have flared up. That means that I need to tread with caution a little bit. If I'm on my period, if I'm ovulating, these are different times where I may choose different exercises from the same category according to what my body needs. So again, it doesn't have to be out of 10. It can be a color rating, symptom present, interference scale. You may have a diary that you fill out, like the coloring in diaries, to show how much your presence of different symptoms are. And you look retrospectively back on the week and say, oh, it's a bit high this week. I might choose some easier exercises. Jane's just said if POTS or MCAS is high, I go with recumbent versions. Exactly. So, but we've got when we're choosing the recumbent exercises, we're choosing them within that category. We're not just choosing a random recumbent exercise. That's why those categories are so helpful, because we can choose one that roughly is actually what we need for that to work those muscles or that movement. You might have your from bed exercises. So you still go through and do your whole body day, but it's your from bed training that you don't even need to go out. You might not be able to leave the house some days. You might have some dumbbells, a set of dumbbells at home, and you come up with a list of exercises from each of these categories that you could do at home easily. Consider MCAS symptoms or correlation symptoms. So that's where that book is really handy, because it runs through a whole bunch of weird symptoms that you wouldn't think of as MCAS. And when that's flaring up, that may give you an idea that something else is flaring up. So that's what I mean by correlation symptoms. Things that maybe don't indicate, like, if my jaw's subluxing, that's not going to affect my training really, but it may mean that I'm extra hypermobile that week. So I need to be extra cautious and eliminate lunges or eliminate something else that may be problematic. So just understanding these symptoms can correlate.
If I feel very sensory overload one week, that's a big one. If I don't like being touched, that's a sign that things have flared up for me. And that's actually, again, something that they mentioned in the book about MCAS. I'm now flared up. That means that probably I'm a little bit more susceptible to things not feeling so good in the gym, and I might go for a lower load exercise. Or I'm also susceptible to getting tipped over the edge of this is now a triggering workout for me in terms of the MCAS stuff. So I know that I'm going to perform in that session on purpose so that I don't trigger anything. So we can look out for some of these correlation symptoms. Eva's asked, do we have a list of bed exercises? No, but I actually was thinking as part of the alumni network, that's something that we can go through. We can run a session on bed exercises for each of these movement categories. These movement categories can be our base, and then we can do different, hotel gym version of how you can do these different categories, at home version, workout in the machines only version, from bed version. So we can do something like that just to fill in these gaps from different angles. So, Kristen, adaptations when I have GI issues. Exactly. You guys are all over this. And again, you're all very intuitive, and we need to learn to listen to that. It may be that the weather's changing. Your fatigue is getting flared up. You don't realize it yet, but your joints are also going to be flared up. And you listen to that fatigue and say, I'm going to do less at the gym this week. And that's you listening to your body to a degree that most people will never even get to in their lifetime. So we listen to our body, we don't ignore it. But the key thing is interpreting that. It's not just listening to it, it's developing our own translation dictionary for what's going on in our body and ignoring what other people tell us. Non-Ehlers-Danlos people tell us we should translate these things as you're tired or you're just lazy. You can't focus or you're just lazy. No. Lazy is not a word that we use here. We need to know how to interpret these signals. So come up with your own translation dictionary for those. And that's a journey. It's not easy to do. And that's why I like to discuss it here, and we can all share these ideas. So it can be really helpful to share these ideas with each other. Now, we can also list out our progressions and regressions based on our capacity. So you may have that for certain exercises, if you feel great on a day, you can add weight. Or for certain exercises, if you don't feel good that day, you may add a band in or add in like a training wheel style thing, or reduce the weight on this day. So you're still training within your capacity. You might find that certain regressions or certain training wheels align better with certain symptoms, and be guided by what feels better or what relieves my symptoms. So this is where I bring us to progression model here. This is the progression model that some of you have seen. It's a very incomplete one, so this is just a work in progress. But basically, a lot of people think of progression as adding load to the bar or doing more reps. There is more to progression than that. And with Ehlers-Danlos, we're very responsive. Don't think of yourself as broken. Think of yourself as very responsive to the environment around you. That's why we get flares up with weather changes. That's why we get flares up with changes in chemicals in the world. I have a theory that all this stuff, all these chemicals that we react to are actually bad for everyone. We're just the canary in the gold mine saying, hey, this is actually not responding well with my body. And maybe in 10 years' time, we're going to find out that there's actually something more serious that they're causing in other people. But anyway, so what we can see here is there's actually all these different ways to progress. And the way I'm seeing it is the red X, there should be one for each of these categories, but I just got lazy and didn't make one for each of them because I keep adding onto it. That's a sign of progression. This is a sign of regression. So we can progress the load. We can add more weight to the bar. We can progress the complexity of the exercise. We can regress the complexity. We can regress the number of joints involved or progress the number of joints involved. We can do the same for range of motion, speed, tempo, exercise, volume, stability demand, proprioceptive demand. We can add in like a wobble factor with bands or something like that. So all of these things are ways that we can progress or regress, challenge on particular joints. For example, if you have a shoulder issue, a low bar squat versus a high bar squat, low bar puts more emphasis on that joint. So challenge on that particular joint. If you're having a bad shoulder day, you might swap to a high bar squat instead of a low bar squat, because that's what you need to do for that day. So that's what I mean when I said that different, where are we? Back here. Different regressions or training wheels. So the training wheels are some of those regressions that actually make things weirdly easier, like adding in proprioceptive demand can actually make it easier, or adding in a band sometimes can actually make us do it better because it challenges the muscles that are being a bit lazy to actually come and kick in and do their work. So certain regressions or training wheels align better with certain symptoms. When my shoulder's playing up, I'll swap to a high bar squat instead of a low bar squat. Be guided by what feels better or what relieves my symptoms. And eventually this will become intuitive. Learn to listen to this. You've got it. You know it. We just need to learn to listen to it and interpret it properly. Now, that's pretty much everything that we're going to talk about with the program from today's session. So what we've covered is our short term. Like I said, let's go back all the way to the start. What we're going to discuss today, planning our training in the day and the week, picking exercises, picking reps and sets, and laying out our training week. So that's what we're covering in today's session. In the next session that we're going to do, it's going to be more about progression, planning it over the long term. How do we actually progress, all of that kind of stuff. But today, the whole point of today was to get you to have a training week that you can follow, to get you to have a training session that you can follow. After this, we're obviously going to add in progressions, but let's recap these steps. Step 1, pick your split. How many days per week can you train? Add in, break up the body part roughly, basically, according to that and what we need. Then we fill in the exercise categories. And again, it may be according to the words or the colors, depending on how temperamental your body is at this point. Then we make a list of exercises for each category. If you've got good momentum in your training, you can pick an exercise, but it's good to have the exercise list there just as a backup in case we need to adjust on the fly or something happens, a dislocation or whatever happens. But if we cannot train consistently, we can use this list as a buffet to choose from on those days. How many sets and reps? That's start with low reps, work your way out from there. We can always add reps as we go, but we need to build tolerance first. Sets and reps I'm less interested in because for a lot of us, we're just at the point where we need to get momentum with our training. We need to get into being able to do training before we start thinking about that higher level stuff, sets and reps. Higher level stuff, sets and reps, we can listen to Gen Pop advice. Increase the volume to increase the muscle hypertrophy, increase the load to increase the strength, those sorts of things, which we can cover more of that in the alumni network. If that's something that you are at that point where you want to actually progress really seriously and you've got momentum in your training, that's when we can start thinking about that. But for now, let's get you doing something and progressing each week with what you're doing, if you can. Some weeks a progression is actually looks like a regression because your container might be a 10-liter container one day and the next week it's a 2-liter container. So 80% of a 10-liter container is going to overflow a 2-liter container. So it may be 90% of a 2-liter container, which is still a progression, but it looks like a regression because our capacity shrunk that day. So how do we figure out what our capacity is? This is how we figure out what our capacity is. We have some kind of a rating scale. It's individual to your symptoms, to what you need. If you're a coach working with a client, you may have a series of questions that you ask them. I know I did. Whereabouts in your menstrual cycle are you today? How's your hip been feeling? Because usually when that flares up, it's an indication that other things are going to flare up. How's your focus been at work? Have you been sleeping okay? These are questions that I ask and I pull back or push forward in the program accordingly. We don't have to add weight every week. Progression is a long-term thing. It's not a week-by-week thing with Ehlers-Danlos. So then we rate our capacity and then we basically, from that, we can know what we're doing on that day. And we come up with this list of exercises ahead of time. So and associate symptoms with it ahead of time. On the day, we know what we need to do. We can do a home version. We can do a bed version. We can do our 100% version. We can do our 60% version. but we have some kind of progression in place. Now, another thing that I haven't mentioned in the slides here is record what you do, write it down somehow. And someone's asked in the chat, I did see someone asked, how do we actually record this? That's a good question. I still haven't found something that I absolutely love. I just use the Notes app on my phone because chances of me forgetting a notebook to the gym are very high. You can use an actual notebook. But I've tried to create a perfect way to record this stuff down. And I've found that there's not a perfect way to record it because all of the ways that I've been taught to record my training relies on me doing consistent stuff each week, which I can't currently do. So you may have that you rate your different symptoms out of 10 in the recording that you do. You may have that I don't feel this today. I do feel this. I did eat this. My appetite was this, whatever it is. And then you write it out. You might find something like Notion, not that one with an M, the AI calendar, not that one. Notion with an N. It's something you can sync up between your computer and your phone. It's a note-taking app. It's got calendars and things like that in it. It's very neurodivergent friendly. Something like that you may find is a good way to record things because that way you've got it on your computer and on your phone. So just find a way to record things down, and I would recommend that. So then at the very least, if you're deadlifting every 6 weeks, then you know what weight to come back to, or you know what you did last week, and you can look back on that 6 months ago and think, oh man, it feels like my progress has just gone nowhere. Hey, wait a second. I was deadlifting 60 kilos then, and now I'm deadlifting 80 kilos. That is progress. So, and remember, building more muscle is going to carry over to everything. And if you're training consistently and eating enough, you're going to build muscle. So one more thing I'm going to add onto this. We talked about Lock and Latham goal setting theory in our goal setting workshop that we did a couple of weeks ago. For those who weren't present, basically it sort of debunked the myth of SMART goals, and SMART goals being the only way to set goals. SMART is like specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, timely, or whatever it is. And it's this thing that people shove down your throats and say, this is how you have to set goals. And everyone talks about it. There's no research behind it, really. It's just something that they came up with in a corporate setting to get staff at a job to work better. A goal setting theory that has had a lot of research into it is Lock and Latham goal setting theory. Yes, goal setting workshop was recorded. I'll cover that at the end. So one of the things that goal setting theory talks about is that we've got these two types of goals, and this is a lot of research has gone into this. We've got performance goals and we've got learning goals. And this is different from the performance and outcome goals that you may have heard some people talk about. This is completely different definitions. In Lock and Latham goal setting theory, performance goals are goals where you already know how to do it. You've done it before. The steps are all laid out. It's easy. It's straightforward. You just need to do it. It's something that you've done before and that your ability to do is pretty consistent. A learning goal is a goal where you actually need to learn some things along the way. You actually need to develop the skills required to do that goal. You don't have those skills yet. You may need to get a mentor. You may need to read books. You may need to just figure things out. There may be known unknowns and unknown unknowns, as in you know what you don't know is a known unknown. Unknown unknown is I don't even know what I don't know. I'm going in blind here. It's like with space. There's known unknowns. We know that this planet exists. We don't know everything about it. There's unknown unknowns. We don't even know some planets and galaxies exist. We don't know about aliens. There's all this stuff that we don't know about space. So there's known unknowns and unknown unknowns with learning goals. With performance goals, it's known knowns. We know what we know and we know it. Now, if you treat a learning goal like a performance goal, you're going to fail. If you treat a learning goal like a performance goal, that involves, I'm going to put time pressure on this. I'm going to put performance pressure on this. I'm going to get someone to breathe down my throat and force me to do this. Or mentally, I'm going to treat this like a performance goal where I have to do it. You're going to fail. Learning goals need space, time, curiosity, and grace. You cannot put time constraints on a learning goal. Performance goals, you can. Performance goals, it's about you just need to get in and get it done. And often having a time constraint on it or SMART goal format for performance goals is actually quite helpful. How is this relevant to what we're talking about today? The fitness industry treats fitness goals like performance goals because for most people they are. For most people, I mean, I actually disagree with this, but a lot of fitness professionals think that the main barrier to exercise is motivation. You're just not motivated enough. You just need to get in and do it. Let's set a big goal. Wake up early in the morning, eat the food, do the training, go home. Just do it. Like the Nike thing, just do it. For Ehlers-Danlos, and in fact, not just Ehlers-Danlos people, for some other people as well, fitness goals are learning goals because our body is constantly fluctuating. My symptoms, there are symptoms that I don't even know about that are going to show up in the next 6 months. I'm constantly changing. I'm constantly learning. I need to learn about anatomy. I need to learn about different exercises. This is a learning goal. So if you put the pressure on yourself to figure this program stuff out, to achieve, to do, you're going to feel like a failure, but you're not. This is where we also come into the idea of a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. A growth mindset says, I can learn and grow into different opportunities. A fixed mindset says, whatever skills and abilities I have right now, they're the ones that I'm set with. Whatever I was born with, that's what I've got. The difference between, a key difference between a fixed mindset and a growth mindset is how they approach failure. A fixed mindset says failure is absolute. Because if all the skills that I've got, I can't develop, if what I've got, what I'm born with, if I'm a gifted child and what I'm born with is all I've got, and then I fail at something, that's the end of that road. For a growth mindset, a failure is an opportunity to learn. And if we approach a learning goal with a fixed mindset, we're not going to do very well. If we skip the learning part, people in the fitness industry tell us we're overthinking things. If we listen to that and think we're overthinking things, making excuses, being lazy, all of this stuff, that's us skipping the learning part. We need to learn about this. And our neurodivergent brains love to learn. So we need to treat this all as a learning goal. So don't think that you need to have it all figured out. If you're one of the people who doesn't know where to even start with a program, let's go back to step 1. Let's pick how many days you want to train per week. Pick some body parts out. Add in some of these different categories and do a couple of exercises from those with low reps, because low reps is safe. And if you feel good, make a note of that in your training. If you feel bad, make a note of that in your training and make an adjustment. Obviously, this is all assuming that everyone's been cleared to exercise and there's no major injuries and all of this sort of thing. This does change if you've got major injuries, and that's something that we would need to adjust for. You can talk to your physio, your doctor about adjusting for that if your doctor's good. But this is all assuming everyone has been cleared for exercise and all of that sort of thing. So that's everything for today. Like I said, we're going to talk a bit more about progress, things like that in the next session. But let's go through the questions now. If you've got any more questions, pop them into the chat. I'm just going to go through the whole chat now and see the questions. Dorian, I would be interested in a deep dive on how histamine interacts with training. I have MCAS and I've noticed it both affects and is affected by my training. I'm interested in this as well, Dorian. I don't know if I have the full knowledge on this yet, but it's something that I am actually learning more about. I don't know if anyone has the full knowledge on it yet either. The limitation is a lot of the people who really understand MCAS are doctors, and a lot of doctors don't understand training. So it is actually completely the role of an exercise scientist to figure that out, which is what I am. So it is something that is actually it falls exactly in my lap, that's the kind of thing that is the job of an exercise scientist to figure out. So it's something that I am interested in. It's a big deep dive that I've been on recently. Again, I'd recommend that book to you if you've got MCAS. I think a lot of us probably do have MCAS or some variation of it. That book will highlight some things and it may just jog a few ideas in your head. I know for me it has. Okay. And then Jade's added in the papers, which I'll make a note of to add into the notes for today, so that just pop those there. Alvi, long time ago, one of my colleagues told me to force my HEDS client to go on a manual treadmill and be more strict. I'm glad I didn't listen. Yeah, the whole be more strict force, like that's an immediate red flag, the word force. Be more strict, another red flag when it comes to HEDS. We can't be strict according to the definition of strict because we have a fluctuating body. It's like saying be strict about going to the beach every day, but some days it's storming, some days it's raining, some days it's freezing, some days it's a cyclone. Imagine telling yourself you've got to go to the beach and show up in a bikini every day. You're like, why would you do that? And then someone who's lives on the equator is like, yeah, you got to go to the beach every day in a bikini. And it's like, you consistently have 40-degree temperatures every single day, Celsius. We have negative degrees some days. I'm not going to go do that. That's the good analogy for the Ehlers-Danlos body, especially the HEDS body. It's got these fluctuations, and it's actually, the consistency is a myth for our bodies. Okay. Alvi, my client told me last year she can't tell the difference between exercise-related soreness and other soreness because she's always sore. That's a bit of a tricky thing to figure out. It's probably a bit too difficult for me to go into depth on now, but it's something that we can talk about in the alumni network. It's something that I'm actually still figuring out how to communicate as well. So if people have ideas, pop them in the chat and we can have a chat about it now. Jade, when I first started again after months and years, I find I have to do 2 sessions in the first 24 hours to avoid MCAS DOMS. Interesting. So as in if you do less than that, it's an issue.
Yes. If I do a yoga session, I have to do another one within 24 hours. If I do any body part, I have to do that body part again in the first 24 hours. If I don't, it's like the first session sets something off in my body and says, hey, we're moving now. And if I don't do the second session, I ache so hard. And if I do the second session, I don't ache so hard. And I haven't looked into the MCAS side of it, but I suspect that the MCAS, the mast cells' role in trying to push more oxygen to the tissues might be a big part of it. But I am going to geek out on that.
That's very interesting. It's also, I would be very interested there to know, because there's different things that can create muscle soreness. One of the main things, the myth that we used to have was that it was lactic acid, which we have sort of dispelled that. The micro tears in the muscle and possibly the like the byproducts of the muscle contraction cycle. But with that, it would suggest that it's not actually the muscle tears, the micro tears in the muscle, which is usually what creates the DOMS. It's not actually that's creating the soreness for you. It's a different superimposed type of soreness. And that's what you need to clear out for some reason with that exercise.
Yeah. And it'll be systemic, and it'll be my previous injuries, and it'll be my previous places that flare. So that's what makes me think it's more of a mast cell thing. But I haven't rebooted workouts since my current mast cell oxygen stabilizing management thing. So it will be really, really interesting to see how that affects it. And if I might skip the second session and see if the pain kicks in. And check back with notes.
That could tie into the stuff that we're talking about with the creatine kinase stuff as well. Because what Jade and I were talking about recently is like this excessive muscle soreness after exercise. It reminds me a lot of a client that I had back in the day who had this condition rhabdo, which is excessive breakdown of muscle tissue after exercise. And the blood marker for it is excessive creatine kinase, particularly muscle creatine kinase. And that's something in the MCAS book that the doctor talks about. My patients, some of them with MCAS, have excessive creatine kinase in the blood, and it's just making me think maybe it's linked. And maybe our muscle soreness that we get that's excessive after exercise in some cases is not actually normal DOMS, it's something else. It's some other mast cell mediated, potentially. Just as this is just throwing ideas out.
Yeah, I'll check with my health nerds. It would be really interesting to see what the time period is for those changes in the blood markers, and to actually get the tests in that time. because I don't want to take a year or more off exercising again. So I'd like this to be a single opportunity to go and get those tests done.
Yeah, 100%. I'm very interested in that.
Cheers.
So Jade's also said in the chat here, I often do drastically reduced reps or just the warm up. That's another thing that we can modulate depending on that. Where are we? Rate your capacity. We can reduce our reps and sets down. We can actually just reduce it down to, I'm just going to do my warm ups today. That can be our backup day that we have. Just some of the core movements from these categories. Maybe we just do the midsection core exercises and the shoulder rotation exercises. And let's say if you feel like hamstrings make a huge difference, that's one that you include.
If I'm just doing the warm-ups, I just do the things that stabilize, not the things that add load.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's another way that we can use that information. So it's not just with picking the exercises, it can also be with picking actually which categories we include or even what reps we include. You may say, you know what, I feel pretty good. I can do this, but I'm only going to do one set of each of these exercises instead of my usual 2 to 3 sets because my fatigue is really high. I don't really feel up to it. I feel very sensory overloaded and I can't handle, I know that I'm at my capacity of something. Sometimes it's not something we can put words to. I know I'm at my capacity of something and I'm not going to go, I'm going to reduce things down, but still maintain some degree of consistency because it's when we stop everything that things can then become an issue when we try and start again. All right. Yeah, people saying that they've intuitively wanted to do less, but told yourself you can't. This is your official permission, you can, and this is coming from an athlete who's represented their country in their sport. That's the attitude you need to get to that level as well. Again, horseshoe theory, a lot of Gen Pop people have the go hard or go home, blah, 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 blah mentality. A lot of athletes also have it, but the role of their coach for a lot of athletes is to pull them back. And a high level athlete, a lot of the time when they've got someone who's pretty high level and then suddenly gets a new coach and they go from high level to elite, usually what their coach has done is pull them back on things. Do less of this, do less of this, do less of this. Cut out that recreational marathon bike ride that you're doing once a week. You're a strength athlete. Stop doing that. Cut this out, and they get their focus more in. No pain, no gain is BS, because if that was true, we would be extremely jacked from all the pain that we're in. Okay. All right, I'm just looking for the next question. Where are we? Yeah, Alvi, if you want to share it in the Facebook group, go ahead. Sorry, I'm just reading through these, trying to find the questions. Okay, Emma's question. I currently have plantar fasciitis and I'm doing a foot and calf exercise from my podiatrist. Am I okay to just do these at the frequency set for me by the podiatrist and leave them out of my gym program? Yeah, absolutely. Or you can incorporate them into your gym program. I would actually, if your podiatrist knows about strength training, I would actually ask them this question. So that's the thing. If we've also got rehab exercises, where do they fit into this? If you trust your rehab specialist, do what they tell you. If you don't trust them, do what I tell you. Or as in incorporate them in basically. I mean, most of the rehab specialists, hopefully we can trust them. If they're giving us strength exercises, it should be all good. But ask them, say, hey, where should I add this in? Should I do it on my warm-ups? Should I do it every day? Should I do it just on the days that I go to the gym? With my rehab stuff, for a while, it was do it every single day. And then it got a little bit more intense, more heavy, more loaded. And it was actually like, I can't do this every day, because if I do it properly, I actually can't recover properly if I do it every day. So when my exercises got a little bit more intense for my rehab, that's when it fell into this program that I'm doing, which is roughly something that looks actually a lot like this. Although for mine, I've actually made all of the leg exercises orange. except for calves and feet. So squat, leg extension, deadlift, hamstring curl, they're all, let's say, orange for me. And it's just, I do some kind of leg on some day. All right. Alvi, is there a way to do ab exercises standing up? Some days my client doesn't want to be on the ground. She wants to sit or stand. I can't think of a way to find any standing anti-extension exercises. Yes, there are. I'm going to make a video on this actually. And I think it's really nice to think of it in this anti-extension, anti-lateral flexion, anti-rotation perspective. Just to give you one idea right now, Alvi, an exercise that I've been playing around with is holding a counterweight. So you can hold it in your hands or you can attach a band to it and hold the band so that there's an extra wobble factor. Hold it in front and walk backwards very slowly. It doesn't sound like much, but give it a go. It's a great anti-extension exercise that you can do standing. I'm going to come up with a video and I'll post it at some point soon, and I'll post it on my Instagram and my TikTok and probably my YouTube as well. C, I'd love to know more about standing anti-extension as well, but also need to drop now, so I'll be on the lookout for the recording. Awesome. As I said, C, watch out for my social media on that one. I really like the kettlebell halos and cable straight arm pull down exercises for standing anti-extension. The kettlebell halos are a little bit of anti-extension, but I wouldn't say that they're predominantly anti-extension. But some of the exercises, I've got some that are really focused in on anti-extension. The other thing is with the kettlebell halos, if you're a little bit intolerant to rotation or to lateral flexion at some point, sometimes we have to be very careful because you're intolerant to this or you can tolerate that. That's when that exercise might be triggering. And you think, why is it triggering me? Well, maybe that's why. But I do have some great anti-extension focused exercises. Alvi, I'm trying to come up with a Google sheet. It's a tedious job. Yes, it is. With all the exercises from each categories, I get too nervous with an exercise causing clicking and I can't think of a substitute on my feet. So a list will help. That's great, Alvi. And you can even just adjust the exercise, the technique, the line that you're moving along. If you get clicking with a lateral raise, try raising it a couple of degrees more to the front or a couple of degrees more to the back. Try angling the hand so that instead of being like this, it's more like this, or it's leading more with the thumb. Those are some adjustments you can make if you need to make an adjustment on the fly. And then worst case is you can come back to that spreadsheet and make a change. Dorian, I think it would be extremely helpful to have a visual reference of each exercise with cues for hypermobile bodies and which muscles you should feel it in. Yes, this is something that I will be building out into the alumni network. In fact, I'm just going to make a copy of that message and just pop that in my notes. Kristen, what do you use to track which exercises you're doing? I Excel an app. Personally, I find apps don't work with my brain because I open up my phone and then I get distracted by something and then I do something else and I also can't find the right app for it and blah, 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 blah. For some reason, Notes app in my phone doesn't do that for me, or just a piece of paper. But again, that's something that I actually don't really know too much. Sarah's said, I use Heavy, H-E-V-Y, which sounds like a great option. So if people are interested, that might be an option to look into. Kelly, so interesting. I've always been prescribed by physio 10 to 15 reps and told to try and get to 20, but have never been able to increase the load. Yes, that's a very common thing. And I mean, I have an idea of where it comes from, but it's something that I talk about a lot in the course. It's a big myth that people with Ehlers-Danlos are better suited to higher reps. If we do not have the tolerance for a movement, how are we supposed to go in and do high reps? And this is a lack of sensitivity. So when I talk about sensitivity, there is a, in statistics, there's a sensitivity, there's sensitivity and specificity of a test. So sensitivity refers to how well a test can identify true positives. So if a test is very sensitive, you might get a lot of false positives along with it because it picks up, it's like when your windscreen wipers, if you've got the ones that sense water, if you increase the sensitivity on the windscreen wipers, any sign of moisture, they'll go. If you reduce the sensitivity on them, that it'll be pouring down rain and they'll only start going when it starts really heavily bucketing down. A lot of trainers and physios don't have the sensitivity in their assessments of people to pick up when things are going wrong with Ehlers-Danlos. They think, oh, you'll be fine. When we don't have enough sensitivity with our assessments, things fall through the cracks. Issues with high reps. And then what happens when they don't have that sensitivity? It gets blamed on you. You're doing the exercise wrong. It's psychosomatic. It's all in your head. You need to think about pain differently. You've got a bad relationship with pain, etc., etc. Some of you have got horror stories. They make my blood boil. In fact, the number one thing that I would change with a lot of people, if you came to me and if I was a physio and someone said, oh, this exercise is causing pain, I'd be like, can you do it low reps without pain? That would be the first question that I would ask. Melissa, getting an Aura ring has helped me to track how ready my body is to exercise. That's another one that may be interesting, is like the heart rate variability. I actually haven't played around with that enough to give advice on it, but that's an indication of recovery. And so that may be something that you could look into. That could be a deep dive, because I know a lot of you are nerdy people who like to deep dive. Dorian, I do a similar thing for my overall activity levels. This is referring to the rate of capacity. I call it my daily forecast. Red days equals minimal activity, heating pad, extra painkillers. Orange, yellow, green means go, etc. I like it. Laura, I'd need a warm-up routine that can help me finding out exactly what my problematic motions are for the day. That's something that I might work on with the Bendy and Strong alumni. Maybe I can work with Shant to create something like that. I'll make a note of that. Also, if you guys have got any notes on that sort of stuff, there's a form that you can fill out for the alumni network to give me advice on what you'd like to include in it. Okay. Alvi, so I was doing lightweight exposure ramp up because my client missed 4 months, but then she told me she wanted to lift heavier because she has been lifting heavy at work. My question, should I keep that in mind during ramp up period? I mean, I would, because that could be putting her at risk if she's doing a lot of stuff at work without a break. Sometimes when you're a coach, it's a case of balancing out what is best for your client with what your client needs, because they're paying you for it. So it can be a bit tricky. It's a tough job to have sometimes. I would find an exercise that she can do quite safely and allow her to go a little bit heavier on that, and just tell her it's not going to be forever. And maybe say, like, we'll track things and see how you go. And if it gets better, then we can accelerate this a little bit faster. Stefan, I've had my most success with an algorithmic program. I learned the algorithm and it becomes automatic. I had A, B, and C days with a break in between. That's 6 days. Since a week is 7 days, I always had the flexibility of a day built in. Had a flexibility day built in. Yeah, building flexibility into the program. Skip day is built in every week, and more circumstances come up. If more circumstances come up, I'm not really tied to the idea of a week. I think what you discuss here gels very well with that. Yes. Something I didn't mention is, like, with this program here, this doesn't have to be Monday. If this exercise that you've got programmed on this day, squats, you don't feel up to squatting this day, you can push this to day 3 and then swap these around, and you can have a rest day today if you need to and swap those around. Swapping your days of the week around is actually one of the best things that I've found. Paula, very helpful material. The steps are great clarification. Looking forward to what the alumni network will bring. That's great, Paula. Thank you for the feedback. Alvi, how many activation exercises should I use, and what's the volume estimation, e.g. hip abduction, leg extension, calf raise before squat? That depends, Alvi, how many activation exercises the client needs. We also want to think stimulate, don't annihilate with the activation exercises. It's really hard for me to answer this. It's a case-by-case basis, enough that they feel good, but not so much that it detracts from the workout. That's not a very specific answer. But as a coach, you've got to trust your ability to figure that out. Jade's going to check the knowledge of her fascia and MCAS nerd network, which is great. Dorian, do you and Jade have a podcast? I would listen to your geek out about exercise science. I've been trying to get Jade to come on the podcast, but we always have, one of us has a flare up whenever we're there, or we just get so distracted just talking about stuff that we don't ever record it. But the people have spoken, Jade. Kristen, is it okay to do the activation exercises every day, or is that too much? Again, if it's what works for you, awesome. If it starts to become too much, pull back. If you want to start really progressing them in terms of performance, every day might get a bit too much. But if it's an Ehlers-Danlos thing and you need that every day, awesome, do it every day. I actually have a pair of weights in my room that I use if I go for too many days without going to the gym. I've got a 5 kilo dumbbell and I'll do some single arm lateral raises, single arm overhead press, sort of to work my shoulders, but also more when I do single arm exercises, my core is so much challenged by it. So that's why I do that, because I need that that extra strength and feedback in my core. Also, some of the activation exercises may improve your proprioception, which we do need to train regularly. So if you feel like you need it every day, it may not be all in your head. Well, it's not all in your head, but there may be a very sensible explanation for it, which could be that. Ray, I have MCAS neuropathy. How can I tell if I'm not engaging a muscle properly or if I'm just having numbness? That's a bit hard for me to answer here, Ray, because it would require a bit more like one-on-one attention to it and discussion around it. If you have a good physiotherapist who understands that, I would be getting their feedback. But just as a general thing, I would say that maybe for you, sometimes it would mean taking a step back from, do I feel this exercise? And relying a little bit more on external feedback from visually how you're doing the exercise, or adding in a band to force a muscle to do a certain way. That's how I would be doing it. I would be adding in all these training wheels, making the exercises foolproof to make sure you're doing it, and starting off with the activations that you absolutely cannot get wrong, the most foolproof activations that really target the muscle, and then slowly building that out. It may be a case of doing PAP before a lot of your exercises. If you want to feel your quads working more, it may be a case of doing a leg extension before you squat, a hamstring curl before you deadlift, a hip thrust before you deadlift. Just as an idea, that's not a prescription. That's just a thought that you can go and talk to a physio about and see if they like that idea. Yeah, Jade said with the tests, high sensitivity is it gets false positives because it's like the windscreen wipers that sense even just a speck of moisture. High specificity is false negatives. So high specificity means if those windscreen wipers said it has to be a certain concentration of water, and if it was slightly dirty or slightly something else, then it wouldn't pick up on it. So that's a kind of way of thinking of that. Alvi, I was always going with high reps before taking bendy and strong. So did the trainer before me, SMH. Honestly, it's a learning curve. I used to prescribe high reps to people as well. I used to do high reps. We all learn. That's what a growth mindset is about. And you are learning, which is awesome. Paula wants the form for the Alumni Network request. I'll pop that in here. Jade, every one of our geeky phone calls should be a podcast. Yes, I agree. Although I do get a bit scared sometimes because some of our ideas are a bit fringe, and I'm like, what if we get like attacked by people who think that, do you know what I mean? Like the whole, like you have to be correct at everything you say. Awesome. I'll pop that here, Paula. I think with the activation exercises, they're making me use muscles that are normally dormant in my hips. So doing every day wakes up those muscles. Perfect. Kristen, I would even suggest doing them before you do stuff. Like before you walk, before you do activities where those muscles are needed. And then as you get better at them, what you'll probably find is your body adapts to them and you need to progress them in some way. When you need to progress them, it may be adding load, or it may be doing them, adding in other bigger exercises as a follow-on from the post-activation potentiation. And at that point, you may need to do them less frequently. So not every single day, because it may become like when you add load, you need more recovery. It's this whole, everything with training is like this balancing act. It's kind of like, I think of it like a sound box in music. You turn one thing up, something else needs to get turned down. Otherwise you're going to max out the speakers. Alvi, I've been practicing bendy and strong exercises on able-bodied guinea pigs and it's doing wonders for them. Yes. But my HEDS client who I'm specifically taking all these lessons for hasn't seen any progress at all. That's okay. I think that it can depend on the person. It can depend on your approach. But the point that you raised there about the able-bodied people, these things work for them as well. I would suggest with your HEDS client, that's N equals 1. So maybe we just need to find the right approach. And sometimes with a HEDS client, it can take a lot of figuring things out to get there. But the fact that you've got this person exercising regularly and presumably not flaring them up means that you're making progress. With HEDS, there can be other things in place. For example, if your client's coming to you for weight loss, there can be other things related to HEDS that are inhibiting weight loss. Appetite control is linked to vitamin deficiencies, MCAS, things like that. In the book, the MCAS book, he talks a lot about someone who had a lot of weight gain and then they got on mast cell stabilizers and they lost the weight. There's lots of things that are, depending on what their goals are, that may be getting in the way that aren't necessarily related to the exercise. If you're getting someone with HEDS exercising and you're not flaring them up, you're doing good things for them. The other stuff we can figure out. But getting someone exercising and moving, my degree is exercise science. The whole thing is physical inactivity is the #1 predictor of a lot of diseases. You're helping them be healthy and stay out of hospital and all of this sort of thing. Jessica, I would love to see a deep dive course about abdominal muscle activation. I often feel like I'm doing it wrong and often fatigue and pain in my back during. That is definitely something that we can do. All right. So I'm going to, if we don't have any more questions, I'm going to stop the recording here. Thank you for everyone watching the recording. Thank you for joining me. So I'll just hit.
That's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Like I said, if you're interested in joining our next cohort of Bendy and Strong, you can go to my website. I'll pop it in the comments in the description below. I'll also try and put all of the links mentioned in this discussion below, but if there's any missing, please just let me know in the comments. And thank you again so much for joining me.